Welcome to the WhereX channel. Before we begin, don't forget to click the subscribe button, enable notifications, and like the video to receive all episodes. Today, we begin a new and exciting series, the beginning of a rock wizard, a terrifying story that will take you on a thrilling journey from the first page to the last. Get ready, mystery and horror will be your companions from the very first moment. I am Rock, a name I inherited from my father, and he inherited it from my grandfather, as if it were a curse passed down from one generation to the next. It wasn't a random name, but a mysterious seal that haunted me wherever I went, a reference to the cursed blood that has run through my veins for centuries. We are not an ordinary family, but a lineage of sorcerers and wizards, steeped in eternal covenants with unseen powers. And each one of us is born carrying a heavy legacy of darkness on our shoulders, from which it is impossible to escape. I remember my childhood well. Our home wasn't like others. Its walls weren't decorated with pictures or paintings, but were covered with strange talismans, dried animal skins, and dolls stuffed with feathers and bones. Its shelves were filled with tattered black books filled with symbols and drawings incomprehensible to the human mind. I didn't have a ball to play with like other children, and I didn't know what it was like to play in the streets. My only toy was a small, bony, cold skull. My father placed it in my hands, smiling cruelly. "This is your future, Rock. Don't run away from it," he said. I grew up watching my father in silence. He spent his nights drawn in intricate circles on the floor, drawing lines with animal blood, or sometimes his own, and repeating words in a tongue so unlike ours that it made the air heavy and the room suffocate. When he lifted his head, would see his eyes glow with a strange color, a color that had nothing to do with humanity. I was still young, but something inside me knew that hidden forces resided among us, whispering in our ears and guiding our steps. It wasn't our ancestors who taught us magic, as I had thought, but the demons themselves. They were the true teachers, the ones who made covenants with us centuries ago, and from that moment on, we were merely extensions of an eternal bargain. Over the years, I grew accustomed to these rituals until they became part of my daily life. I was no longer surprised by the midnight screams that filled the house, nor by the bodies writhing before us as we invoked unbearable curses. I thought this was normal, for a human being to live as a servant of darkness, for your life to be a series of commands carried out for the benefit of entities you cannot see, entities that feed on your fear and your desire for power. But what no one told me was that these spirits were eternally hungry, an insatiable, unquenchable hunger. Every time we fulfilled one of their requests, they demanded another, and every time we lit a small fire, a larger one would ignite. It was as if we were feeding a beast that only grew thirstier. Then came the fateful day. I was 15 years old when my father took me to a room I had never been allowed to enter before. Its door was made of rusty iron, covered in strange patterns that seemed to move the longer I stared at it. My father opened the door slowly, and the sound of its creaking pierced my ears like a scream from another world. He pushed me inside, and there, in the darkness, I saw something I had never imagined. The ground was marked with a massive circle, its lines drawn in fresh blood, glowing with a dim, reddish light. At its center stood a distorted form, the likes of which I had never seen. It was neither human nor animal, but a distorted jumble of limbs twisted, its face covered in shadows, and blazing eyes staring directly at me. I felt as if they were piercing my chest and stealing my breath. My father stood beside me, his voice hoarse, half proud and half cruel. "Today your journey begins, Rock. Today you will make your covenant, just as we made ours before you." My blood froze, and my knees trembled until I could barely stand. Whispers began to fill the room, voices in multiple languages I didn't understand, but which were clear to me, seeping like poison into my soul. The entity in the circle smiled, or perhaps it was just a horrific twist of its distorted face. I didn't know whether it was a welcome or a threat, but I felt my life snap in two at that moment, the life before that night and the life after. I've never forgotten that day. It was the beginning of my entrance into a world from which there was no return. A world that knew no mercy, a world where blood was the only price, and where each new covenant sliced a part of your soul until all that remained was an empty shell serving the darkness. From my earliest childhood, I wasn't an ordinary child like my peers. I didn't laugh heartily like they did, nor did I run carelessly through the alleys. I always felt something dark coursing through my veins, as if a hidden voice from another world was whispering in my ear, guiding me, watching me, and fueling a strange desire within me that I couldn't understand. I saw what no one else could see, heard screams at night that no one else could hear, and watched shadows move in corners even when the place was completely empty. This wasn't an illusion. I was born into a house that had been plagued by magic for generations. My grandfather was a great sorcerer feared and revered by the villagers, and my father inherited the same dark power from him. And here I am, their grandson, carrying the same cursed legacy. It wasn't a choice, it was my destiny. It was as if my blood was sealed with an inescapable stigma, destined to be a new link in a long chain of darkness. I remember the first lessons I received from my father. He stared at me with his cold eyes and said, "Magic, rock, isn't empty words or child's play. It's a contract. An unbreakable contract. If you want power, you must give. If you want to be obeyed, you must first obey." His words were heavy as rocks, terrifying and mesmerizing me at the same time. I didn't understand what he meant that day, but at night I would see him sitting alone in a dark room, drawing strange circles with ash and blood, placing offerings on the fire, and then muttering until his voice changed, sounding like the growling of a monster emerging from the depths of hell. I would hide behind the door, watching, feeling as though I were facing a secret beyond any child's ability to bear. As the years passed, it ceased to be a secret. He began to teach me, little by little, how to write spells with my trembling hands, how to summon spirits to carry out my commands, how to make a man sick for no reason, or a woman hate her husband for no reason. I practiced it, and each time I felt a part of my humanity erode. At first, I would cry secretly at night, but then I got used to it. Gradually, fear turned to curiosity, curiosity to desire, and desire to addiction. My father would see me, and I could see a strange satisfaction in his eyes, as if he saw himself reflected within me. He would pat my shoulder and say, "You're our extension, Rook. The witch flame in our family will never be extinguished." But despite all of this, there was another voice inside me, weak but stubborn. I felt an emptiness growing wider every day, as if I were falling into a bottomless abyss. I would wonder, am I a slave to my inheritance? Am I merely a tool in the hands of demons, to be manipulated wherever they wish? Or could I rebel and break this chain that has bound my family for centuries? I was living a silent struggle. During the day, I practice magic, and at night, I have nightmares haunted by dark faces, my grandfather standing there smiling, watching me from afar, as if to say, "You will not escape." As I approached puberty, the day came that would change my life forever. On a stormy night, my father took me to a locked room I had never been allowed to enter before. Its door was made of rusty iron, dotted with strange inscriptions. He opened it slowly and pushed me inside. There, in the darkness, I saw a large circle drawn in blood, glowing with red threads as if it were pulsating with life. At its center stood a distorted entity, a hybrid of human, animal, and demonic shadow, its eyes blazing with an unquenchable hell. My father approached me, his voice hoarse as he said, "Today your journey begins, Rock. Today you will make your covenant, just as we made ours before you." My blood froze. Whispers filled the room, as if hundreds of souls were whispering in my ear at once. The entity within the circle was smiling, or perhaps growling. I could no longer distinguish. I felt then that my life had been shattered, and that the line separating me from the darkness had been erased forever. I will never forget that day. It was the beginning of my entry into a world from which there was no return. I was no longer that naive boy who opened books without understanding. Instead, I delved into the depths of the pages as if searching for my lost self, for my true features buried among the talismans and burnt letters. I flipped through the ancient manuscripts left behind by my father and grandfather, and as I progressed between the lines, I felt a wall of mystery slowly cracking before me, as if buried secrets were waiting for the right moment to devour me. The manuscripts were dilapidated, their pages yellow and brittle, and they exuded the smell of mold and ash. Strangely, however, when I reached out to them, I felt a warmth creeping through my skin, as if fire were lurking between the lines. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a hidden connection with an invisible force. I placed my hand on one of the pages and felt my pulse race violently, as if the book itself was swallowing my breath. Suddenly, whispering voices reached my ears. They were initially indistinct, like a wind blowing through a narrow corridor. Then, gradually, the words began to emerge. "We are here, we never left, the bloodline is unbroken." My limbs stiffened, and I trembled until I felt the ground shake beneath my feet. I quickly turned around, certain someone was watching me from the shadows, but all I saw were the cold walls of the room, adorned with black cracks that resembled veins extending through the stone. Yet, I knew that what I had heard was not an illusion, but a deep-seated certainty. I continued reading until I came across a page with text different from the rest. It spoke of the first pact, the covenant my grandfather had made with the shadow being centuries ago. The words weren't just a myth, but a real document sealed with a black seal embedded in the paper, a seal whose traces would never fade, as if darkness itself had left its mark there. The manuscript says that my grandfather made a great sacrifice, something that wasn't clearly stated, perhaps a soul, perhaps the blood of our descendants, in exchange for unlimited power. From that moment on, every child born into our family was bound by the same covenant, doomed to follow the same dark path. I read, and every hair on my body trembled, but strangely, fear didn't prevail. On the contrary, a terrifying curiosity was raging inside me, a curiosity stronger than any awe. I was captivated by what I was discovering, as if something in my blood rejoiced the closer I got to these secrets. Indeed, I felt that the more I immersed myself in these mysteries, the more an ancient part of me that had been dormant since my birth was awakened. In a moment of silence, a question occurred to me that had haunted me. Am I the one reading these manuscripts, or are the manuscripts reading me? I didn't find the answer, but I knew that the deeper I delved, the closer I was to the point from which I could never return. The night was unusually still, and the house was suffocating with a heavy silence unlike any I had ever known. Even the hands of the clock seemed to have stopped, and the air itself was stagnant, wrapping itself around my chest like an invisible hand trying to strangle me. I sat alone in the room, the manuscript open before me on a strange page, depicted with a distorted face, eyes glowing like two embers in the darkness of the paper. Underneath the face, I glimpsed a short sentence engraved in dark script, its letters sunk into the paper as if written in dried blood. "Read to awaken, and pray to come." I didn't think long. Curious to the point of stupidity, I mumbled the words between my lips, thinking I was reading just a careless line. Little did I realize that what I had spoken was a ritual that opened doors not meant for humans. Suddenly, everything changed. The air in the room felt heavier, as if a wall of black fog had fallen over me. My breathing became ragged, and the lights began to flicker violently, then went out one by one, until I was plunged into total darkness. The darkness wasn't ordinary, it was thick, tangible, as if a living entity were wrapping itself around me. From the corner of the room, a dark mass began to form, a tall shadow slowly creeping like smoke rising from an inferno. It wasn't just a shadow. It twisted and expanded until it assumed a human form, but its face was featureless, just a black void absorbing my gaze. Then came the voice. It wasn't a voice in the usual sense. It was a mixture of overlapping whispers, the creaking of scraping metal, and a distant wail. All of these sounds combined to form a sentence that pierced my mind. Finally, the heir of blood summoned us with his tongue. I felt sweat dripping from my forehead, and a chill ran through my limbs. I wanted to scream, to run, to open the door, but my feet were like stone. Something strange pulled me to a place, as if a shadow had bound me with invisible threads. However, it wasn't just fear that filled me, but another feeling, an ominous curiosity, an involuntary desire to know more. The mouthless being smiled, and yet I heard a laugh echoing inside my head, a laugh that made my bones tremble. Your father resisted, but failed. Now, you have two choices, to fulfill the covenant, or to be erased from the lineage. He moved closer, and the more he moved, the darkness around him expanded as if the room were swallowing itself up. I could feel his cold touch against my skin, and the smell of ancient rot permeated my nostrils, the scent of deserted graves and fossilized cobwebs. I took a step back, but an inner voice, not mine, whispered clearly to me. Do not run away, this is your destiny. At that moment, I realized the real confrontation had begun. It was no longer just pages and manuscripts, nor mere whispers from the past. They had already been summoned, and the blood that ran through my veins was no longer mine alone. I stood there, torn between resistance and surrender, and I knew that, whether I liked it or not, I had become part of a covenant that was never meant to be made, a world no human being was ever meant to see. I didn't sleep that night, even though my body was exhausted and my mind reeling from the weight of what had happened. The words I'd heard from the mysterious being echoed inside me endlessly, like a broken bell clanging in my head, either you fulfill the covenant, or you will be erased from the lineage. As dawn broke, nothing changed, the fear only grew stranger. The house was immersed in an unfamiliar, heavy silence, as if time had stopped at its threshold. No birdsong, no rustle of wind, even the hands of the clock seemed to be moving deliberately slowly, as if they, too, were waiting for something. I sat by the window, staring at the pale gray horizon. The sun rose slowly but didn't bring light. Instead, it sent a sickly light creeping over the walls like a dead shadow. I returned to the manuscript, trying to understand what had happened. The shock increased when I found the page I'd been reading the day before, blank. No drawing, no letters, no sentence that portended a curse. Just a pale whiteness like cracked skin. I tried to convince myself that what had happened was nothing but an illusion brought on by the night's fatigue, but when I touched the paper with my fingertips, I felt a slight warmth pulsating from the pages, as if they were breathing. Suddenly, words appeared before me out of nowhere, their lines falling slowly as if they were being engraved with fresh blood. Prove your loyalty, and follow us where we call. My breathing quickened, and before I could comprehend what was happening, there were knocks on the front door. They were slow and heavy, as if something massive was being hammered by a solid object, not a human hand. I stood frozen, my hand trembling, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. When I opened the door, I found no one, except a dead black bird carefully placed on the threshold. Its beak was broken, and its left eye was pierced, as if someone had deliberately plucked it out. I slowly raised my gaze to find a symbol on the opposite wall that hadn't been there before, a circle with 3 twisting lines intersecting inside, resembling snakes in a tangle. Slowly, I reached out and touched the inscription. At that moment, a familiar voice exploded in my head, clearer than ever. Follow the sign. The test begins. As if my feet were no longer mine, I walked out of the house, propelled by a mysterious force. The dirt path I had walked thousands of times seemed alien, as if it hadn't been created for humans. The trees I had known since childhood were twisted, their trunks twisting like tortured bodies, their leaves rustling slowly, as if whispering about me. I felt as if I were being watched, not by one eye, but by dozens of eyes lurking in the shadows. After a long walk through the woods, I arrived at an old, abandoned cabin. It looked like it had died long ago. Its wooden walls were corroded, its windows were broken, and its hanging door swayed like a corpse on a gallows. Yet, I knew with certainty that this was the place the symbol had led me to. I stepped inside, and immediately a cold, harsh breeze pierced my bones. The smell that filled my nostrils was a mixture of mold and dampness, as if the place hadn't been inhabited for centuries. In the center of the hut was a large circle painted with a mixture of ash and dried blood, glowing dimly. Inside the circle was an old wooden chair, and above it stood a cracked human skull, radiating a dark aura. Before I could move, the door slammed behind me and closed. The light that had filtered through the cracks disappeared, plunging the room into darkness. Suddenly, the circle lit up in a glowing red, illuminating the space with a demonic light. The same voice echoed again, this time like an ear-piercing metallic screeching. The first test is to face your greatest fear. I didn't understand what it meant until the skull began to move. Slowly, it raised its head toward me, and from the hollow sockets of its empty eyes, a thick black smoke poured, gathering before me until it took on a familiar shape. My blood froze. It was my father's face. But his eyes were as empty as an abyss, and his voice came out distorted and broken. "Why are you searching for secrets, Rock? Why didn't you let me bury the curse alone?" My knees buckled, and I staggered back, but the face floated into the air and followed me. It resembled my father in every detail, except that his smile was distorted, cut off like a broken doll's. I couldn't look at him for long. I felt that if I looked any longer, I would fall into a dark abyss from which there was no return. Inside me, I heard the whisper growing louder. "If you run, you will fall. If you face, you will continue on." I shouted with all my might, facing the entity. "You are not my father. My father died with dignity, not a slave to shadows." The face suddenly exploded in a cloud of red smoke, and the ground beneath me shook as if it would swallow me up. I fell to my knees, but a strange warmth seeped into my veins, as if an ancient fire had taken up residence within me. The voice came back, clearer, closer, almost coming from within me. "I've passed the beginning, but there's still a long way to go, heir of the blood." I opened my eyes to find myself standing outside the hut, the forest around me silent once again. There was no sign of the circle, the skull, or the smoke. It was as if nothing had happened. But I knew I had changed, and that this was only the first step on a long road, a road leading directly into the heart of darkness. I didn't sleep that night. My body was stretched out on the bed, but my eyes remained fixed on the ceiling, following the darkness that slowly crept across the room. Every tiny whisper of wood, every faint rustle in the corners, seemed to me like a message from another world. I was no longer able to distinguish what was real from what might have been the product of my hallucinations, as if the lines between reality and nightmares were beginning to blur. As the night grew heavier, a strange image began to form in my mind, a long, dark corridor branching off from the heart of the house, resembling an ancient, never-before-seen vestibule, its walls cracked and stained with a deep blackness resembling the effects of a fire. Muffled murmurs echoed from within, overlapping voices, neither human nor animal, merely whispers seeping in like smoke. At first, I convinced myself that what I was seeing was merely an illusion, but as time passed, I felt as if unseen forces were actually drawing me towards it, pushing me with an irresistible pull. I got out of bed with heavy steps, as if my feet weren't my own. I walked through the dark corridors of the house, everything still, but inside me, there was an incessant noise. I stood in front of the antique wooden bookcase my family had inherited, and my fingers trembled. I'd always heard whispers of secrets buried behind those shelves, secrets that should never be revealed. I extended my trembling hand and pulled a worn book from the top corner. A hollow, mechanical sound emanated, and then the bookcase slowly moved, opening into a dark void that swallowed the view, a hidden passageway, just as it had appeared in my imagination. I advanced inside slowly, the sound of my footsteps echoing with a heavy thud, as if the walls were swallowing every sound and returning it distorted. Every time I stepped, I felt as if other breaths were accompanying me, drawing closer, mimicking my own, until I became certain that I was not alone. At the end of the corridor, a wide space opened into an underground hall. Its high walls were covered with strange, carefully engraved symbols, twisting shapes like snakes and flaming circles. In the center of the hall stood a massive stone altar, surrounded by a row of candles that had long since been extinguished, leaving behind the stench of burning wax and suffocating mold. I approached hesitantly, and each step felt as if I were being forcibly pulled away. I placed my hand on the cold surface of the altar, and suddenly a searing heat surged through my fingers, as if the stone were pulsing with life. Words that hadn't existed a moment before emerged from its surface, letters glowing blood red, as if awakened by my touch. Blood is the covenant. The soul is the price. And he who bears the name remains in darkness. My blood froze, and a shiver ran through my body from head to toe. I realized then that these words weren't just an inscription, but an ancient contract, a blood pact binding my lineage to a dark world. I hadn't just inherited a house, a library, or manuscripts. I had inherited an inescapable curse. At that moment, the air around me changed. It felt heavier, as if the entire room was closing in on me. I felt a cold breath creeping into my neck, and a whispering voice pierced my ear from somewhere very close, too close. "You're next, no more escape." My knees gave way, and I fell to the floor, panting, trying to convince myself that this was just a nightmare. But something inside me screamed. I'd crossed the line, opened the door that wouldn't close. The corridor wasn't just a corridor, it was the beginning of a path dragging me toward an abyss from which there was no return. I left there weighed down by a heavy burden, as if something had clung to my shoulders and wouldn't let go. Since that day, I've never seen the world the same. Every person I passed, every eye I met, I saw a strange shadow following them, a black specter moving lightly, visible only to me. I realized then that the demons were no longer behind the walls. They were now with me every moment, a part of my day, a part of me. I had no idea that when I opened that hidden door in my grandparents' house, I was opening another door, a door to the depths of darkness that I had never imagined existed in such terrifying ways. My home, where I had lived my entire childhood, looked like any other house on the outside, old walls cracked with age, and a wooden roof creaked with every wind. But behind those walls, another world lay lurking, waiting for the moment when I would weaken enough to reach out and uncover its secrets. The cellar I had entered last night wasn't just a place where magical tools or remnants of ancient rituals were stored, as I had suspected. Rather, it was more like a temple to demons, an underground kingdom teeming with wandering spirits. The walls were covered in symbols engraved with dried blood, cracked as if they were still bleeding despite the passage of centuries. Some of them I didn't understand, and some I felt I'd read before in the secret manuscripts I'd inherited from my father, but I'd always avoided reading them carefully for fear of opening a door I couldn't close. As for the floor, it was painted with interlocking black circles, intricate geometric shapes of charcoal and ash, intersecting with other smaller circles surrounded by the remains of burnt animal bones, like keys locked to other worlds. I advanced hesitantly, the air in that basement so heavy it almost suffocated my chest. Every breath I took came out hot and returned icy cold, as if the place was gradually stealing my warmth. Suddenly, I heard whispers coming from deep within, whispers whose language I didn't understand, but they weren't just passing words. Messages implanted directly in my mind, without passing through my ears. They whispered to me slowly. "You are one of us, and you are not one of them. Your blood is our blood, and your voice is our voice." I shuddered as I covered my ears, trying to banish those words, but they became clearer the more I tried to ignore them. Nevertheless, I continued walking until I stood before an old wooden table, weathered at the edges and covered in dust, as if it hadn't been touched for hundreds of years. On top of it lay a huge book covered in iron chains, chains twisted like snakes, violently entwining them. I reached out and touched the chains, and they suddenly trembled, making a faint metallic sound as if they were breathing. A chill ran through my skin, and I quickly withdrew my hand, but curiosity, or perhaps a curse, prompted me to try again. When I placed my hand again on the cover, the chains suddenly shuddered and then opened automatically, as if recognizing me as the rightful heir to this cursed legacy. I slowly opened the book, and the first pages were written not in ink, but in dark, congealed blood, the scent of which still lingered in the air. It was filled with drawings and symbols, some familiar, some I'd never seen before. What terrified me most, however, was the fact that I found my family name engraved in bold letters on the first page, Rock's lineage. Underneath this name was a long list of my ancestors, each bound by a covenant with a different demon. Every time I ran my fingers over a name, I felt a sudden headache and a vague image flashed through my mind: bloody rituals, human sacrifices, red flames, and muffled screams. At that moment, I felt the ground shake beneath me, as if the entire vault had begun to pulsate with life. Suddenly, I heard a deafening scream, but it didn't come from outside. It came from within me, from deep within my head, as if it had split my skull in two. You will not escape, you will not emerge, you are destined to complete what your ancestors began. I fell to my knees, covering my ears with my hands, but the screaming didn't stop. It grew louder and louder until I felt my eyes might burst from the pressure. In an instant, all the candles illuminating the basement went out, and I was plunged into a deep, pitch-black darkness. It wasn't just any darkness, it was a living being coiled around me and swallowed me up. Out of the blackness, I began to see glowing red eyes. It wasn't just one eye, but dozens, then hundreds, surrounding me on all sides. They had no body, just blazing gazes piercing me from deep within. I felt those eyes knew me, memorized my name, memorized my blood, and awaited my command. Amidst this ring of darkness, I heard a single voice, deeper than all else, a voice that made my bones tremble. You are not our master yet, but you will be. Those eyes drew near, swirling around me like a whirlpool, and I shivered like a child caught in a storm. Yet I felt a strange power pulsing in my blood, a power I had never known before, as if something had awakened within me. I no longer knew whether to resist, or whether to surrender. Before my consciousness completely collapsed, I heard one last sentence that made my soul tremble. The next chapter will begin, when you choose, to become one of us, or for us to tear your soul apart. Then darkness fell again, and I fell into a bottomless abyss. I never thought I'd reach this level of certainty mixed with terror, where everything around me was subject to dark interpretations linked to the demons I inherited with my blood. I thought I was just a sorcerer, an extension of an ancient lineage of forbidden practices, but the truth was even more sinister. My very blood carried an eternal curse that bound me to their world, without even uttering a single spell. That night, as I watched the moon from my window, I felt a cold current permeate my body. It wasn't just an ordinary cold, it was something penetrating deep within me, awakening hidden cells and making them tremble. Suddenly, I heard the familiar whispers, but this time they were closer than ever, as if they were coming from within me, emerging from my blood, caressing my mind with a terrifying lightness. A hoarse voice said, as if it had emerged from within my bones, "Rock, you no longer need us. We are in your blood, feeding on your pulse, growing with your breath." My being trembled, and I remembered what my father had said one day as he recounted his final instructions to me. Don't delve too deeply into our ancient books, because if you find the truth, you will lose control of yourself. But I had found the truth, or rather, the truth had found me. I began to notice that when I became angry or terrified, my features would change for brief moments, my eyes darkening, and my facial features would distort as if something were trying to escape from within me. Each time this happened, the demons would laugh softly inside me, mocking my weakness, as if to say, "You were not born to be your own master, you are just a vessel." One evening, while searching through my grandfather's papers, I found a book covered in layers of dust, one that no one before me had dared to open. It bore a strange title, The Cursed Blood Covenant. With every page I turned, I felt as if the air around me grew heavier, and the letters of the book recited themselves in a voice I could not hear with my ears, but directly with my mind. I became increasingly certain that I was merely a link in a long chain of victims. Each generation of my family believed it was in control, when in reality, it was merely a vessel for evil to perpetuate itself. The most dangerous thing I read in that book was a phrase written in thick black script, stretching across the page like a living being. Whoever attempts to break the covenant, their blood will flow before they can speak its name. I trembled and found myself placing my hand on my chest, as if my heart had become a vessel for what the book was saying, beating so loudly that the walls could barely hear it. I realized that my repentance would not be just a decision, but a battle with a legacy that had resided within me for generations, a battle against merciless blood and against forces too powerful to be resisted by hope alone. Yet there was a glimmer of hope, faint but present. On the last page, I found a cryptic reference to the lost key, an ancient symbol capable of severing the bond between blood and demons. The book didn't explain much, but it mentioned a distant place deep in the mountains where the secret lay hidden. I felt a chill run deep within me, along with a sense of dread and excitement at the same time, as if the world were waiting for me to dare to take that journey. I closed the book and placed my hand on my chest, my heart pounding unnaturally, as if something inside me rejected the idea. Then I heard an inner scream shake my head. "You will not escape, we are you, and you are us." I smiled with a sneer mixed with despair, and whispered to myself, "But I will try, even if it costs me my own blood." At that moment, I felt the air around me grow heavier, as if the walls were closing in on me. The whispers of the demons grew clearer, calling my names, touching my memories, reminding me of every moment of weakness I'd experienced, every fear I'd tried to hide from myself. I knew the path ahead was no longer an ordinary road, but a dark tunnel with no return, where each step required me to confront myself before confronting any external being. And so began the first step in a struggle not just against the demons, but against a curse running through my veins, against a legacy that wanted to swallow me whole, against a self I no longer recognized. All I could do was move forward, knowing that every moment of weakness could cost me my life, and that every faint laugh in the dark was a reminder that I was no longer alone, but rather, we were all inside this body, two souls, or more, vying for control. I thought I'd reached the bottom of the abyss, that nothing remained to astonish or terrify me after everything I'd been through. But I was wrong, madly wrong. That night, as I returned to my room, trying to gather the remnants of my soul, drowsiness overcame me, and I fell into a deep sleep. It wasn't a peaceful sleep, it was another gateway to a world I'd never imagined. I found myself standing in a dark corridor, its walls built of damp stones, dripping with cold water like ancient blood dripping from the ceiling. The corridor was endlessly long, and at the end of it, I could see doors stacked together. Each door was engraved with a strange symbol resembling the talismans I'd inherited from my father and grandfather. Some of these symbols moved lightly, as if the stones themselves were breathing. I approached the first door. It was engraved with a demon's head with two long horns, one of which extended like a tongue of flame. I reached out to open it, and a gruff voice whispered in my ear, "Don't touch it, not yet." I stepped back, my heart nearly leaping out of my chest. I looked around, but saw no one, but a deep sense of surveillance gripped me, as if my every move had been monitored since the moment of my birth. I walked toward the second door, where I found a carving of a huge eye staring at me. The closer I got to it, the more I felt my body freeze, a mysterious force simultaneously pulling me forward and backward. Then, the door opened by itself, as if it knew I was its heir. Behind it, I saw a scene I've never forgotten, a dark hall, its ceiling suspended by iron chains, and the floor paved with small bones. Among them were burning candles, reflecting a weak light onto the faces of the gathered demons. They were diverse beings, some with human features but empty black eyes, others distorted and without any definite shape, their shadows writhing as if alive. They were gathered around a massive stone throne, upon which sat a formidable, mysterious entity, seemingly the embodiment of darkness itself. Its body was covered in freely moving shadows, and its eyes, like two glowing embers, watched me deeply. The entity raised its head toward me and said in a deep voice that shook the place until the chains trembled, "Finally, the heir to the lineage has arrived." I felt a chill run through my veins. I couldn't move, I couldn't even scream. There was something that connected me to the place, something that made me a part of it, as if my body had become a link in an unbreakable chain. The entity continued, its voice echoing through the walls. You don't yet know the value of the blood that runs through your veins. Your ancestors made covenants with us hundreds of years ago. Each one took their share, and now it's your turn. You cannot escape this legacy. I shouted at it, trying to summon my tattered courage. I will not be your slave. I saw what my father and grandfather did to you, and I saw the devastation you brought upon our lives. I will not repeat their mistake. The entity laughed a deafening laugh, shaking the entire place. Even the chains hanging on the floor began to swing violently, as if they were fingers trying to grab me. No one chooses, Rock. We choose. As for you, you were born sealed with our seal. Suddenly, the hall went dark, and I fell into an endless, dark void. Everything went black, except for the sound of my heart, which echoed in my ears like war drums. I felt completely lost, torn between reality and a dream, until I almost lost my sense of self. I woke up panting, sweat drenched my face and body. Dawn was about to break, but I found no relief. I felt that what I had seen was not just a dream, but a message from the world that was now stalking me. I spent all day searching for any clue, rummaging through ancient manuscripts, and found a neglected text in the corner of a black book covered in spiders. Every heir born into this lineage is born with an invisible seal. This seal binds their soul to the world of shadows, making it a door that will open when their time comes. As I read that sentence, my entire body froze. The door I had seen in the dream was not a dream. It was one of those doors mentioned in the scrolls. And I was just beginning. Since that night, I was no longer sure if I was living my own life, or if I was merely an instrument of an eternal force greater than myself. Everything seemed alive, every shadow followed me, and every whisper in the room reminded me that I was not alone. One thing was clear, I was no longer Rook the human, but Rook the sealed, heir to a world that knew no mercy, and the voice of the demons had become part of my very breath, pulsing with me every moment. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my bed in the dark, hearing every whisper and every movement throughout the house. It was as if the walls themselves were watching me, and the air had become too heavy to breathe easily. I closed my eyes several times, but the images that clung to my mind never left me, the faces of the demons, their voices, and the dark covenants I'd inherited against my will. With the first light of dawn, I sat down at the old wooden table I'd inherited from my father. I laid out all the books and manuscripts I'd collected from his room on it, then began reading voraciously, like someone searching for a drop of water in a desert. Each page held a deeper secret than the last, talismans, covenants written in black blood, and the names of demons I'd never heard of before. But what truly terrified me was that many of these pages weren't in my father's handwriting, but in my own. My blood froze. How could this be? When had I written these words? When had I performed these rituals? Had I been a tool in the hands of the demons since childhood without even knowing it? Were they moving me like puppets with strings? I lifted my head to see the small mirror hanging on the opposite wall, revealing a strange reflection. I didn't see myself as I knew myself, but a different face, pale, with eyes glowing like embers, and a mouth smiling a sly smile I'd never learned. I moved closer, but the closer I got, the clearer the face became, until I heard a whisper coming from the glass itself. You're just the beginning, the lineage isn't over yet. I screamed with all my might and slammed my fist into the mirror. The glass shattered around the room, but the sound didn't stop. It turned into intermittent laughter, as if it were coming from every corner around me. I covered my ears with my hands, but the laughter grew louder, piercing my head and gnawing at my mind. I couldn't stand it any longer, so I quickly left the house, searching for fresh air to extinguish the fire burning inside me. But the streets were unusually empty, and the sky was overcast with black clouds, even though the day had just begun. Everything whispered to me, you won't escape. Wherever you go, we are with you. I stood at the edge of the nearby forest, where I had played as a child, and remembered how my father had always warned me not to enter it. But now I was no longer that naive child. I was the heir of darkness, whether I liked it or not. I entered the forest with hesitant steps, a strange feeling within me that I was walking toward my inevitable destiny. There, amidst the tall trees and dancing shadows, I found a circle of ancient stones, engraved with symbols I knew well. I sat in their center, feeling as though I had returned to a place I had belonged to long ago. Suddenly, a strong wind rose, and the fog gathered around me until I could no longer see anything. From the mist emerged dark shapes, dancing along the edges of the circle, approaching and then receding, all whispering my name. Rock. Rock. Our heir. Our coming Lord. It was then that I realized I was no longer in the position of choosing. Rather, I am part of a game bigger than myself, a game that began long before I was born. And everything I've seen so far has been only the beginning of what lies ahead. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath my feet, and I heard heavy footsteps approaching from the shadows. They were approaching at a rapid pace, without any source I could see. A cold wind crept into my chest, as if it wanted to freeze my heart before something stronger could reach me. Small creatures appeared before me, their eyes bloodshot, their voices like the creaking of metal. They spoke in a language no one understood, yet I felt the meaning reach directly into my heart. You are the only one who can break the covenant, or be tyrannized forever. I trembled, but inside me, a small flame of rebellion remained unquenched. I realized that the path to salvation would not be easy, and that every step I took now would be a direct confrontation with the darkness that had inhabited me since birth. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and said to myself, I will not allow them to complete what my ancestors started. Even if the path to salvation is drenched in blood, I will walk it to the end. When I opened my eyes, the fog had lifted slightly, and the symbols on the stones glowed a faint red, as if awaiting my next step. For the first time, I felt that I had some control over this world that had always wanted to swallow me up. I thought I'd reached the deepest level of my family's dark secrets, but I was wrong. One night, when it was quiet, I sat in my grandfather's room, rummaging through his old books. The smell of burnt paper mixed with the worn dust made me feel as if I were opening a graveyard of memories. As I turned the pages, my eyes fell on a small notebook, covered in dark leather dotted with strange inscriptions. It was unlike any book I had ever read. I tremblingly opened it, to find words written in a sinuous, bloody script. The words were like incantations, but they weren't just static lines. They seemed to come alive, writhing between the letters as if the demons themselves lived among them. I read the first sentence, and a whisper rang in my ear, "Finally, you found our way." My blood froze. I quickly closed the notebook, but the whisper wouldn't stop. It echoed inside me, urging me not to open any more. I tried to resist it, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it again and discovered that this notebook had not only belonged to my grandfather, but was also the covenant the family had made with the demons hundreds of years ago. I read the details of the agreement, that every member of the lineage would be a servant of the demons, supplying them with human energy through evil deeds in exchange for power, money, and protection. Each generation added their own blood to the covenant to keep it renewed, as if the family was forever indebted to them. The facts gradually became clear to me. My father had not chosen the path of magic voluntarily, and my grandfather had not practiced it out of love. Rather, they were prisoners of this covenant, victims of a merciless grip. Yet, they pretended to be powerful, as if they were in control. I stood in front of the mirror, examining myself, wondering, am I, too, just a link in this cursed chain? Will I be the next servant, or the rebel who will break the chain? But my mind didn't allow me to think for long, as I began to hear voices in the room. They weren't human voices, but deep hisses rising from the walls. I felt it caressing my ear and then moving through my body. "You're ours, whether you like it or not." I shivered. A harsh chill enveloped my neck, as if an invisible hand were pressing down on me. I tried to run away, but my feet were glued to the ground. I saw nothing, yet I felt their presence, surrounding me from all sides, watched by invisible eyes, their voices shaking me until I could hear my heartbeat echoing with their murmurs. "Leave me alone," I cried. Another, harsher voice came, sounding as if it came from deep within the earth. "You will not continue your life as you wish. You are the heir to the throne." My soul trembled, and images of my father and grandfather began to flash before my eyes, as if they were watching me from another world, giving me signs, warning me, and at the same time trying to free me from this dark prison. Only then did I realize that everything I had discovered was only the beginning. And that the path I had chosen, the path of repentance and liberation, would not just be a battle with myself, but with forces that feed on my blood and claim me as their own. I walked out of the room, carrying the notebook in my hand, knowing that these pages would be the key to my true struggle. It was no longer just a matter of exposing family secrets, but of confronting the demons themselves, and confronting the destiny that had dogged me since birth. Suddenly, I felt a cool breeze envelop my body from the outside. It was as if the room itself was breathing, contracting, and expanding, whispering my name once more. "Rock, we are waiting for you. You will not flee, and you will not choose, we choose." But inside me, a small flame of rebellion had not yet been extinguished. I knew that this fire alone would determine whether I would surrender to the cursed contract, or stand up against the darkness, even if the price was my blood and my entire being. Little did I know that my first steps on this dark path would open doors I had never even imagined existed. I thought I had reached the furthest reaches of knowledge about the demonic world, and that I no longer needed any more secrets or rituals. But I discovered that every secret revealed was only a prelude to another, deeper and more terrifying one. That cold night, I sat in the basement of the dark house, a place I had always avoided as a child. Its damp walls and the stench of mold mixed with ancient smoke made me feel as if I were in the bowels of a forgotten tomb. In front of me lay dilapidated wooden boxes containing notebooks and papers my father had left behind before his passing. I reviewed his talismans and drawings filled with mysterious symbols, searching for a thread that would connect me to his truth. As I leafed through the yellowed, worn pages, I found a single, distinctive piece of paper, written in black ink that had not faded despite the passage of time. It contained only a short sentence, but it shook me to my core. "Whoever holds the blood of the family holds the keys to the underworld." My breath stopped for a moment, and my hands trembled until the paper fell from my fingers. What did this phrase mean? Did our blood hold an eternal secret that made us special from the rest of humanity? Were we just ordinary magicians, or were we connected to something greater and more dangerous? The shock drove me to dig deeper. I was no longer searching out of curiosity, but out of a desire to survive. Behind a crumbling wall, I discovered another notebook that my father had carefully hidden. It was covered in a layer of dust, as if he wanted it to remain forgotten. I slowly opened it, and inside, I found strange drawings of enormous stone gates, surrounded by symbols I had never seen before. In the margins were clear references to bloody rituals used to open these gates, requiring the sacrifice of a closest blood relative, meaning a family member. At that moment, I felt the earth spin beneath me. I was no longer just a son in a strange family, but an heir to an ancient covenant, a covenant made hundreds of years ago that made our blood the key to unlocking what should never be unlocked. As I immersed myself in the pages of the notebook, a faint whisper crept into my ear. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the words were clear enough to make my heart pound. "You are the chosen one. Your blood is the key." I gasped and threw the notebook to the floor. I grabbed an oil lamp to light the place, but the shadows in the corners of the cellar seemed to be moving, undulating, approaching. There was no one there, yet I felt a cold breath on my neck, and another voice whispering behind me. "You will not escape your legacy. You are the heir to the covenant." I was about to go crazy. I wanted to run from the cellar, but my feet were stuck to the floor as if an invisible force was holding me back. I shouted with all my might, "Leave me!" But my response came with terrifying calm. "If you try to escape, the doors will be opened with your blood, whether you want them to or not." I retraced my steps with difficulty until I found myself outside the basement, breathing like someone who had just drowned. In my hand, the notebook was still clinging to me, as if it didn't want to let go. From that night on, it wasn't just about exposing family secrets, or about rejecting a dark legacy. I realized I was at the center of a game far bigger than I had ever imagined. My father, my grandfather, and all my ancestors were merely pawns on the underworld's chessboard. Now it was my turn to be the next pawn, or the hand that turned the entire table. But the question that haunted me relentlessly was, do I have the courage to face this fate? Or am I, despite all my efforts, just another tool that will complete the cursed cycle of blood? I never imagined that one day I would stand before myself in such a strange way, as if confronting a ghost emerging from the depths of a past I hadn't personally experienced, yet one that ran through my blood like poison. I stood trembling in the basement, where no one could hear or see me, except for the damp walls stained with the traces of mold and time. In front of me stood the black mirror I had inherited from my father, the one that had remained locked for decades, covered by a heavy iron cover that could only be removed if certain conditions of forbidden rituals were fulfilled. I had long known that this mirror was more than just an old ornament or an ordinary heirloom. I had been warned repeatedly not to touch it, but the whispers that had haunted me for weeks would not leave me. The voices grew louder in my head each night, until I could hear them as if they were the beating of my own heart. "Open the mirror, we are waiting for you, your blood knows the way." I hesitated a lot. I told myself I was no longer that wizard greedy for power, and that I was capable of breaking the old shackles. But curiosity was like a drug running through my mind, pulling me step by step toward my destiny. I prepared the room for the ritual. I turned off all the lights, leaving only 2 candles whose flames danced on the basement walls, casting broken shadows like spirits moving around me. I placed the mirror in the middle of the floor and sat in front of it, muttering the few remaining incantations I remembered from my father's recollections. My hands were trembling, but I still grasped the cold iron cover and slowly lifted it. The moment the mirror's surface was revealed, I felt the ground beneath my feet shake. A wave of heavy air swept through the space, an air with a foul odor, a mixture of mold and old blood. The mirror's surface was no longer solid. It began to swirl like black water stirred by a hidden wind. I stared at it in astonishment until the outlines of a face appeared, mine, but its eyes weren't mine. That face looked at me coldly, then said in a deep, crackling voice, as if emerging from the chests of hundreds of beings, "Finally, you've broken the barrier, opened the gate. How long we've waited for this moment." I took a step back, my heart nearly bursting out of my ribs. I asked in a broken voice, Who are you? And why do you resemble me?" He smiled a cold smile, a smile devoid of any trace of humanity, and said, "I am nothing but your true reflection, the shadow left in this mirror by the sins of your ancestors. We are the other face of your family, the demons who fed your strength in exchange for your souls. You are nothing but an extension of a chain of dark covenants." His words fell upon me like a thunderbolt. I thought I had chosen this path of my own volition, but the truth seemed clearer. What I was experiencing was not a personal destiny but an inherited blood curse. I tried to scream, to break the mirror in his face, but my body wouldn't obey me. My hands froze as if they were bound by invisible chains. The entity continued from within the glass. "Every time you try to escape, you'll come back to us. We're in your blood, and you're in ours. There's no salvation without a price, and the price is greater than you can imagine." Then the room began to spin around me, as if the walls were collapsing inward. Both candles went out at once, and I was plunged into pitch darkness. All that remained before me was his eyes, shining from within the glass, red like embers. His voice was no longer a single one, but dozens of overlapping whispers, some laughing, some screaming, some reciting incantations I couldn't understand. Soon you'll know, the repentance you seek is not salvation, it's a new door to the abyss. Suddenly, a cold hand extended from within the liquid surface of the mirror, a hand just like mine, only thinner and stained with blood. It tried to grab me, to pull me back inside. I screamed with all the strength left in my throat and threw the mirror away. It fell to the ground and shattered, or so I thought. When I approached, I found no shards. It was as if the mirror had evaporated into thin air. All that remained was the scent of ash and blood. I sat on the ground, panting, my heart pounding violently in my chest until I thought it would explode. At that moment, I realized that I was no longer haunted by voices alone, nor by fleeting nightmares. I had broken the barrier and unleashed what had been trapped deep within the mirror. Now, the demons no longer came to me in strange forms, but rather, they wore my own face. Night had fallen over the entire village, and it seemed as if the sky itself had turned into a black shroud covering the earth. The silence of the night was unusual. It was heavy, suffocating, as if the air were filled with secrets no one dared to reveal. I sat alone in my room, contemplating the slowly melting candle, watching the fire bend with every breath the darkness around me exhaled. I felt that the candle was not just a piece of melting wax, but another life being extinguished before me, and every drop of wax that fell reminded me that time was stealing me mercilessly. I am Rook, the last heir to a cursed lineage. Since childhood, I have heard whispers echoing in my head, voices that no one else could hear. I used to think they were mere illusions, remnants of my grandfather's stories about witches and ancient covenants, but now I realize that those voices were nothing but calls from another world, a dark world waiting to emerge. I'd always believed I was in control of my life, that I was the ultimate master, but over time, I discovered the terrifying truth. I was nothing but a small puppet, moved by invisible strings, guided by those who dwell in the darkness. That night, I was visited by a nightmare unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. I found myself standing in a huge hall, its walls made of black stone bleeding, from which words flowed in a language I'd never seen before, but somehow understood. In the middle of the hall sat a man who looked exactly like me, a carbon copy of my features, but his eyes burned a hellish red. When he spoke, I heard his voice emerge, but it was tinged with evil, as if a dark shadow had occupied my throat. Haven't you realized yet? I'm you. I'm the face you tried to hide from yourself, the part you buried alive, but it kept waiting for this moment to return. My legs trembled, and I tried to scream, but he beat me to it with a cold smile. Every word he spoke pierced my soul like knives. I felt as if I were standing before a mirror revealing what I didn't want to see, a mirror reflecting my filthiest secrets and the sins of my ancestors. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my room as I'd expected. I was in a long, dark basement, its walls smelling of incense mixed with decay. There, a dark figure appeared before me, its body changing every moment, sometimes taking on the face of my father, sometimes my grandfather, sometimes my own. Its wings were enormous, covering the ceiling, and its eyes were two embers illuminating the darkness. It extended a long, black hand, its fingers like claws, and pointed at me, saying, "The time has come, Rock. You are not just a passing magician, you are the chosen one to fulfill an ancient covenant. Your blood binds us, and your soul is the key to our gates. Do not try to escape, escape is not meant for the likes of you." My whole body trembled, and I tried to retreat, but the ground itself betrayed me. From beneath it emerged black chains, alive like snakes, which coiled around my feet and hands, tightening their grip on me. I shouted at the top of my lungs, "I will not be your slave. I am not a puppet in your kingdom." The authority laughed so loudly that the walls of the crypt shook, a laugh that was not human. It drew closer, so close that I could feel its cold breath burning my face, and whispered, "You have been our slave since birth, and your blood is the unbreakable covenant. Whoever dares to break the covenant, will pay with their mind and soul. Suddenly, more voices began to rise from every direction. Many voices, overlapping, like a chorus of ghosts. The voices of all my ancestors, all merging into one recurring sentence. Escape if you can, but you will not escape, you will not escape. I felt the whole place crumble around me. The walls of the crypt began to crack, blood dripped from the graffiti, and the floor shook. In a fleeting moment, everything went dark. I opened my eyes to find myself back in my room. The candle was still burning, but its duration was much shorter, as if many hours had passed. I sat panting, sweat dripping from my forehead. I wondered in astonishment, was what I had experienced a dream? Or had I truly crossed into another world beyond the bounds of time? That night, I realized the truth I had been running away from. I am not just a member of an ordinary family. I am the son of an ancient covenant, an era of blood and darkness. If I didn't discover its secrets, would surely be swallowed up. But the problem was that every step toward knowledge pushed me deeper into the maze, and every door I opened only led me to another, more terrifying door. I was walking an endlessly dark path, and every time I thought I was getting closer to the truth, I discovered that the truth itself was merely a mask concealing an even more terrifying face. I never imagined I'd sink so deeply into the darkness. I thought I'd glimpsed all the cruelty and brutality the demonic world could hold, but what I experienced was only the beginning of a journey longer than I imagined, one fraught with endless nightmares. I sat alone in my old room, the room I inherited from my grandparents, which since childhood had made me feel uneasy. The walls were cracked, damp crept between the corners, and the stench of mold clung to my nostrils like an inextinguishable curse. Frayed ropes hung from the ceiling, as if waiting for a neck to wrap around them. On the opposite wall sat an old, broken mirror, half of it reflecting my fading image, the other half sinking into a bottomless black depth. The mirror wasn't just glass. I felt it as if it were an eye watching me, a window open to another world. I stared at it for a long time, seeing strange movements in the blackness, writhing shadows, and faces whose features changed with frightening rapidity. Sometimes she smiles sarcastically, and sometimes she whispers whispers I can't understand, but they pierce my ears and settle in my heart. On that fateful night, I took hesitant steps toward the mirror. I didn't know why, but something was pushing me, an invisible force pulling me like a drowning person pulls air. As I drew closer, a strange voice began to penetrate my hearing, many overlapping whispers, as if dozens of mouths were speaking at once. I didn't understand all the words, but the meaning was clear, imbued with both promise and threat. Your true power has yet to begin. If you want immortality, we are the way. My limbs trembled, and I suddenly remembered the words of my grandfather, the man who died repeating his warnings. Don't stare too long into the mirror, Rock. It's not just glass, it's an open door. I had laughed at his words that day, dismissing them as mere old wives' tales, but at that moment I understood that my grandfather wasn't crazy. He knew the truth. I hesitated for a few seconds, but I didn't resist. Something inside me urged me to reach out. As soon as I touched the mirror's surface, I realized the true horror. I didn't feel the coldness of the glass, but the warmth of a pulsating body, as if I had placed my hand on a living being. Suddenly, a long black arm emerged from the blackness, wrapped itself around my wrist with iron strength, and violently pulled me inside. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone, swallowed by a bottomless abyss. I fell into a place I'd never seen before, cracked earth, from which suffocating fumes burned my lungs, and the sky was covered in a thick fog, within which a faint red glow shone, like embers burning above me. In the shadows, small, repulsive creatures moved, with eyes glowing like fire and mouths full of sharp teeth. They sprinted among the rocks at terrifying speed, and when one of them came close, it muttered in a hoarse, broken voice. At last, the heir of the blood has come. We've waited so long for you. I stepped back, but the earth itself seemed to be trying to swallow me. Suddenly, out of the fog, a massive being appeared. His black wings stretched like clouds, and his face was distorted, a mixture of human and monstrous features. He changed every second. Sometimes he looked like my father, sometimes my grandfather, sometimes me. He raised his hand, and the air around me froze, even my breath stopping in my chest. Then he spoke in a deep voice that shook the ground beneath him. "Rock. Don't try to escape. You were born to fulfill the covenant. Your blood is sealed with our promises, and your soul is the last key to our survival." I felt my whole body tremble, and a chill pierced my bones. I wanted to scream and deny it, but something inside me, a dark part one wasn't aware of, whispered, "You know this is your destiny. You know there's no escape." I felt another, harsher hand touch my left wrist. I looked up, and another black arm had left a burning black mark on my skin. The pain was unbearable, but it wasn't just physical pain, it was a sense of belonging, as if something inside me was awakening. Suddenly, as if I'd awakened from a coma, I found myself on the floor of my room, next to the shattered mirror. My chest rose and fell as if I'd run long distances, and on my wrist remained a clear mark, a black fingerprint, like a hand that hadn't yet been erased. At that moment, I realized I was no longer just a human being venturing closer to the world of demons. I was no longer trapped between them and my reality. Rather, I had become, without realizing it, a part of them, and the mirror was only the beginning of the journey. I was no longer the same man after everything I'd experienced. I would wake up during long nights as if emerging from a dark abyss. I didn't know if I'd truly slept or if I'd been lost in other worlds unseen by anyone but myself. I could hear their whispers even in the silence of the day, as if the demons I'd inherited from my family were no longer content with the night, but had invaded my every moment, haunting me even when I was awake. I walked the streets like any other person, but my shadow didn't move like a human shadow. Sometimes it lagged behind, other times it preceded me. In the eyes of passers-by, I was just an ordinary person, but I knew I was no longer that. Something in my blood had changed, something that drew the breath of darkness to me. In that chapter of my life, I began to discover that the knowledge I possessed was only a small part of a boundless sea. My grandfather and father always hid papers and books from me that I was never allowed to touch. I thought I had inherited their entire legacy of magic and curses, but the truth was more sinister and horrific than I expected. One evening, as I crept into the basement I had long been forbidden from entering, I found a battered wooden box surrounded by symbols engraved on the floor. Just looking at them made me feel a pang in my chest and a desire to retreat, but my curiosity was stronger than any fear. I opened the box with a trembling hand and found ancient manuscripts written in a language I didn't fully understand, but which was similar to spells I had used in the past. On one of the pages was a strange drawing of overlapping circles, with tearful human eyes in the middle. When I touched the black ink with which it was drawn, I felt a warmth running through my fingers, as if the ink was still alive. Suddenly, I heard a voice echo behind me. It wasn't my father's or my grandfather's, but something else, something inhuman. "You finally opened the door," the voice said in a language I hadn't learned, yet I understood clearly. I turned around in panic, seeing nothing but darkness. But the darkness seemed to breathe. Little by little, from the shadows, blazing red eyes emerged, observing me like a hunter observing his prey. At that moment, I realized that the demons I'd been dealing with all my life were merely intermediaries, mere servants of a greater voice, of a presence far darker than I'd ever imagined. I found myself unconsciously asking, "Who are you? And why are you talking to me now?" The reply came in a whisper, getting closer and closer until I felt it emerging from within me. "I am the origin of the lineage, I am the one from the first pact with your distant ancestor. You are nothing but vessels, and now you are the chosen one." My limbs trembled, and a terrible weight weighed heavily on my chest. I tried to scream, to deny, but something inside me believed it. I remembered all the strange signs of my childhood, my father's silent stares when I asked embarrassing questions, my grandfather's trembling hand as he wrote names in the sand, dreams filled with shadows whispering secrets I didn't understand. But what added to my terror was that when I returned to the manuscripts, I found my name written there, engraved in ancient ink, among dozens of names belonging to my ancestors. It was as if a curse had been waiting for me since birth, waiting for the moment I would open that box. That night, I realized that I was not just a magician continuing his family's tradition, but rather a link in a dark chain that had begun centuries before. I had a choice to make: either surrender and become a tool for this unknown entity, or find a way to salvation. But what salvation? How could the heir of demons be freed from the poisoned blood that ran through his veins? From that night on, every day became a battle, between an overwhelming will that drove me to continue on the path, and a weak ray within me that cried out for salvation. I knew the next chapter of my life would be more dangerous than the last, because I was no longer facing just scattered demons, but the root of evil itself. Night wasn't much different from day in my world, both melted into a thick, inextinguishable blackness that enveloped my heart like smoke around a blazing fire deep in a dark cave. Even daylight seemed dim, as if the sun had lost its power as it approached our home. I thought I'd reached the limit of my knowledge of demons and the cursed covenant that had bound my family for centuries, but what unfolded before me those days shattered every certainty I'd built and turned my balance upside down. I was sitting in my grandfather's old room, the room I'd always avoided as a child because of its strange smell, a mixture of musty walls and the scent of burning incense. The floor creaked disturbingly with every step, and the walls were cracked as if they held secrets they could no longer conceal. As I contemplated the dust accumulating on the bookshelves, I noticed a small gap in the wall near the wooden bed. I pushed a worn stone, and a dark cavity opened before me. Inside was a small wooden box, covered in a thick layer of dirt, as if it had been hiding for centuries, waiting for this moment. I grasped the box with trembling hands and slowly opened it. A heavy dust rose from it, making my chest constrict, as if the air itself refused to enter my lungs. Inside, I found a dark leather notebook with a cracked cover, dotted with strange symbols engraved in faint red lines. They glowed for a moment before my gaze, as if they had been written in blood and had never dried. I hesitated before touching it, but my curiosity was stronger than my terror. I extended my fingers, and as soon as I touched the first page, I felt a heat flow from my fingertips into my veins. It was an unfamiliar heat, like a living, pulsating current. I began to read, and the words pierced my mind like poisoned needles. They weren't just lines, they were written whispers, seeping into my soul with every letter. Through it, I learned that the demons I believed served my family weren't servants at all, but prisoners. My father and grandfather weren't the masters I'd thought, but jailers, shackling those damned souls through rituals and blood, in exchange for false loyalty. But the biggest shock came when I turned the next pages. There was a secret I hadn't even dared to imagine. In every generation, there is a blood sacrifice, a victim offered to keep the chain strong. My grandfather sacrificed his older brother, and my father sacrificed a relative who vanished without a trace. I suddenly felt a sharp chill run through my veins, as if the words had pounced on me, devouring me alive. Then came the whisper, a whisper coming not from my mouth or the room, but from the void itself. "Rock, you're next." My limbs froze, and my eyes widened until I felt my eyelids tearing apart. On the wall in front of me, a black shadow began to form, featureless, a blurry, yet eerily familiar. The closer it got, the more I felt the air around me grow heavier, as if the room were turning into a sealed tomb. "You are just another link in the chain," the voice said, its voice echoing inside my skull, not my ears. "Your blood is the price to pay. If you don't pay, the chains will break, and we will spread everywhere." I tried to scream, but my voice was choked in my throat. I tried to run, but my feet froze as if the ground had held me in its grip. I could only stare at the shadow as it slowly expanded, engulfing the wall, then the ceiling, then the walls, until I felt myself drowning in an endless entity. I pushed myself staggering out, the notebook still clutched in my hand, like someone bearing an unshakable curse. I knew my life was no longer my own, and the blood coursing through my veins had become the signature of a covenant I had never chosen. Yet, amidst the terror that tore me apart, something else stirred within me, a burning desire to know everything, to uncover what my grandfather, my father, and everyone who came before me had kept hidden. I knew I was walking on the edge of an abyss, and that any wrong move could drive me to madness or death. Yet, I couldn't back down. I had to face the whole truth, no matter the cost. I thought I'd reached the ultimate limits of madness, but I was wrong. The truth was farther and deeper than I'd imagined. The night wasn't an ordinary night. It was more like a sea without shores, swallowing me up every time I thought I'd found my way to shore. I sat in my old room, alone, besieged by the echoes of memories I couldn't expel. In front of me was the black mirror, the mirror I'd inherited from my father, the one he'd warned me about throughout his life. I'd thought it was just a strange tool of sorcery, an artifact that had lost its value over time, but I realized too late that it was nothing more than a window. A window into a world I shouldn't have seen. I extended my trembling hand to its cold surface, and darkness swallowed my reflection, revealing another face, mine, but distorted. His eyes burned like two embers, and his slanted smile dripped with malice. He raised his head slightly and said in my same voice, "Rock, you've been too late. You've always been half dead. It's time for me to complete you." My lips trembled, but curiosity was stronger than my fear. I whispered, "Who are you?" He laughed so loudly that the glass shook and said, "I am you," without restraint. "I am the blood you inherited, the shadow that has watched you since birth. You've tried to suppress me, but you can't escape me." Suddenly, the mirror began to shake like a basin of water, and strange sounds echoed from its depths, overlapping voices, hundreds, even thousands, of whispers. A dark choir chanted incantations that I couldn't understand, but whose echo pierced my bones. Before I could comprehend what was happening, the room around me disappeared. I found myself standing in a vast hall, its floor made of hot ash that stung my feet, its walls breathing like a living body. The ceiling was lost in endless darkness. In the center of the hall rose a massive black throne, wrapped around it in massive chains resembling metal snakes, each link pulsing with a deep red light. Surrounding the throne were dozens of beings resembling neither humans nor animals, faces that shifted every second, eyes that glowed in the darkness, bodies that twisted and melted like smoke. A massive being shrouded in a thick black fog sat on the throne. I couldn't see his features clearly, but his presence was enough to paralyze my will. His voice, when he spoke, was like thunder, striking directly at my chest. "Finally, you've come, son of the lineage. You've been waited for so long." I froze, trembling like a lost child, my heart pounding violently, nearly tearing my ribs apart. I didn't dare reply, but the being continued. "Your blood is too precious to be wasted. You bear the seal, and the seal is indelible." He pointed, and the creatures surrounded me, swirling rapidly, their voices mingling into a storm of screams, laughter, and whispers. I tried to scream, "No! I won't be anyone's slave. I'm tired of these chains." But his voice laughed, a laugh that shook the ground beneath my feet. He said, "You will not choose. Blood chose you long ago. You are the last link, and if you break it, everything in these chains will be freed, and your world will be plunged into darkness." I screamed with all my might, and suddenly darkness swallowed me. I woke up lying on the floor of my room, the mirror in front of me cracking from the inside as if it would explode. My entire body was drenched in sweat, but the most terrifying thing was what I saw on my hands, strange engravings, etched into my skin as if they had been branded with an inextinguishable fire. I frantically tried to wipe them away, but they wouldn't disappear. Instead, they glowed redder every time I touched them. I realized then that what had happened was no dream. I emerged from that night marked, the mark of the beginning of a new phase, more horrific than anything that had come before. And ever since that night, I have never slept peacefully. Every time I close my eyes, I hear whispers calling to me, see the throne again, and feel the ground shake beneath my feet, as if the entire world were pushing me toward a fate I had not chosen, a dark fate that eagerly awaited me. I sat in a dark corner of the room, surrounded by the fumes of incense that were seeping into my lungs as if they were feeding off my breath. The night was heavy, silent except for my ragged breathing. The moon peered through the crack of a narrow window, like a glassy eye watching me mercilessly, as if witnessing my life. Although its light was dim, I felt as if another eye was watching me, one that saw not through the light, but through the darkness that surrounded me on all sides. In the last few days, everything had changed. The voices that had initially been vague, intermittent whispers were no longer so. They had become clear, strict orders, as if issued by warlords who would not tolerate disobedience. The demons were pressuring me more than ever, pushing me toward a step from which there was no return. They had repeatedly drunk my blood and enjoyed the rituals they forced me to perform, but this time they weren't satisfied. They were demanding something greater, something eternal, that I sign over my entire lifespan, my soul, which cannot be bought or sold, to be their eternal slave. But my insides were cracking. The closer I came to surrender, the deeper I felt I was sliding into a bottomless abyss, as if the earth were opening its mouth to swallow me up. I became afraid of sleep, because sleep was no longer a rest, but an open gateway to vivid nightmares. I saw burned faces, featureless bodies, and groans that followed me wherever I went. What terrified me most was that they all called me by the same name, my own, Rock. Rock. You won't escape. One night, I couldn't bear it anymore. My feet led my trembling body to my father's old library. I had always avoided it. For me, it wasn't just bookshelves, but a graveyard of dark secrets. Every book in it radiated an energy that no one else could see, a heavy energy that pressed down on my chest. Yet a mysterious desire compelled me to extend my trembling hand, until I came across a massive tome bound in worn black leather. When I opened it, the scent of ancient blood emanated from it, as if the pages themselves had been drenched with offerings. The pages were filled with symbols I had never seen before, lines intertwined like snakes swooping down on their reader. But amidst these symbols, a single sentence stood out in ancient Arabic, clear as if it had been written specifically for me. Whoever writes their name and their blood on these pages will never be free again. My blood froze. Only then did I realize that what we had inherited was not merely sorcery, as I had suspected. It was not a game of black magic, but an ancient covenant, a chain that had been entwined around the lineage for centuries. My father was no ordinary sorcerer, and my grandfather was no scholar, as I had been told. They were mere tools in the hands of merciless entities. But the biggest surprise wasn't in the sentence, but in the paper folded between the pages. It was a letter in my father's handwriting. I shuddered as I read his words. My son, don't think I chose this path willingly. We were born its captives. Whenever I tried to resist, they made me pay a heavy price. Yet there is still hope in you. You may be different. Remember, they cannot force your soul if you resist. If you sign with your blood, it's all over. Be careful. I felt as if the earth was shaking beneath me. For the first time, I saw my father not as an ally of darkness, but as a victim like me. My eyes filled with tears, and my heart pounded violently. There was a glimmer of light, albeit a tiny one, but at the same time, a danger deeper than I had imagined. That night, they wouldn't leave me alone. I had a nightmare unlike any other dream. My father appeared before me, his body charred, his eyes lifeless, screaming in a terrifying voice. It's too late, Rock, you're ours, forever. I woke up in a panic, my face drenched in cold sweat, my chest heaving as if I'd just survived a drowning. But before I could catch my breath, I heard the whisper, not in my head, but directly in my ear, very close at hand. Tomorrow, your blood will be written, whether you like it or not. Only then did I realize I was on the threshold of a great confrontation. I had only two choices: resist until the end, or fall and become another link in the chain of eternal slavery. But inside me, one question screamed unanswered. Am I truly capable of resisting, or was I created from the beginning to be a slave to darkness? I could no longer distinguish whether I was walking a path chosen by my feet, or whether demons were still guiding my steps with invisible threads, embedded in my skin like invisible thorns. The last few days had been nothing but a slow guillotine, each moment more intense than the one before. Night was no longer my refuge, it had become my prison, and the walls no longer embraced me, but rather suffocated me. Everything haunted me: the echo of footsteps in the corridor, the flickering of the candle, and even the silence of the room began to scream at me, reminding me of a curse written upon me before I opened my eyes to this world. I sat alone in the narrow room, darkness enveloped me like an ancient shroud, and the single candle I had lit swayed as if melting from the terror surrounding it. Beside me lay the ancient book I had inherited from my father, the Dark Testament. It wasn't just a book, it was like a shrine containing family secrets, souls, and blood. How many times I tried to ignore it, to bury it in a dark corner of my memory, but something hidden drew me to it every time I tried to escape. When I reached out with my trembling hand and touched its cover, I felt as if I had touched an open wound that had been bleeding for centuries. A deadly chill coursed through my veins, making me shiver as if I had embraced death itself. I slowly opened the cover, and an ancient, putrid smell filled my nostrils. It wasn't just dust, it was the smell of graves. I contemplated the words that seemed to pulsate across the page, black lines that shimmered a deep red in the candlelight, as if they were written with ink and blood. I read the first sentence, and my body shuddered. He who makes a covenant, there is no salvation. He who breaks it, burns. And he who tries to break it, is consumed by the curse to the bone. I closed the book in one fell swoop, my heart pounding madly, my breath racing, and the memories of my ancestors crumbling before me like ghosts. Burned faces, extinguished eyes, screams buried beneath the dust. I knew at that moment that I was just another link in a cursed chain, and that this legacy wasn't something I could easily discard. But the night showed no mercy. The walls began to whisper, voices rising and falling, some calling out my name, others laughing savagely, as if celebrating my imminent downfall. Just when I thought I had reached the peak of madness, my father's face appeared before me. It wasn't a shadowy specter, but a dense, tangible presence, as if his body had come to life again. His eyes were a glowing ember, and his voice came out like the growl of a trapped beast. "Rock, you've taken too long. The covenant demands you, and your blood is the price. If you don't finish what we started, the darkness will tear you apart from within." I shouted with a determination I didn't know I possessed. "I will not be a slave. I will not surrender myself to you. I've had enough of these chains, of your blood, of your curse. I want to live, as a human being." But his voice turned into thunder piercing my bones. "Either you continue, or you and everyone you love will be erased from existence." Then he disappeared, leaving behind a thick black smoke. It wasn't ordinary smoke, but a living thread that expanded and entered my chest. I felt my breath being forcibly drawn out, and my heart tightening as if it were being squeezed between claws. I fell to the ground, panting, tears streaming from my eyes uncontrollably. With the first light of dawn, I sat exhausted, besieged by tears and nightmares. I swore to myself that I would never open that book again, but deep within me whispered otherwise. I knew that even if I burned the book, the demons would not be extinguished by its fire. They are here, in my blood, in the echo of my name, in every breath I take. Then I realized the frightening truth. I was no longer facing just a book or an ancient curse. I was part of an eternal war, a war fought not with swords or fire, but with a fragile will, a soul torn between light and darkness. And now, I don't know if there is enough light within me to endure, or if I am just a tiny flame that will soon be extinguished in an unforgiving storm. I was no longer the man I was a few years ago. I was no longer the young man who easily surrendered to the will of demons, nor the sorcerer who believed his power came from rituals and blood. I was burdened by experiences, burdened by memories, surrounded by secrets, as if I carried a history of inherited curses on my shoulders. I was sitting that night in a dark room lit only by a weak candle, watching the wisps of smoke writhe like snakes searching for prey. As I followed them, the old whispers returned to my ears, the voices of my grandfather, my father, and all those connected to the cursed blood of my family. The voices were fragmented, but clear enough to awaken a question that had long haunted me: where does this path lead? I was not oblivious to the fate that awaited everyone who dealt with demons. I knew full well that the end always ended in blood and destruction, but I wanted to understand one thing: why us? Why my family in particular? In recent days, I've begun to discover that this wasn't just a coincidence, but that an ancient covenant had been concluded centuries ago. I found remnants of secret manuscripts hidden in a rusty chest left behind by my father, telling the story's beginning. One of my distant ancestors, a greedy man named Eldar, sold his entire lineage in exchange for power that lasted no more than 20 years. Since then, my family has been imprisoned by that covenant. Each generation is forced to carry on the dark legacy and commune with demons to keep the covenant alive. As I read those words, my blood froze. I thought I'd chosen this path of my own accord, but the terrifying truth was that I was merely a small cog in a hellish machine that had begun turning centuries earlier. But on the other hand, I was no longer that naive person. I learned a great deal about the weaknesses of demons, their contradictory natures, and how to exploit their internal conflicts. I realized that, despite their power, they are not invincible creatures. Rather, they fight among themselves just as humans do, each striving to be the strongest. That night, I decided to summon one of them, not to take orders as usual, but to force them to reveal what they were hiding. I drew the circle, prepared the ancient symbols, and slowly began the ritual. The smell of rotten blood pervaded the space, and the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. Then, suddenly, the wall in front of me trembled, and a huge-eyed being emerged from it, his body writhing like a lifeless shadow. At last, he said in a hollow voice, "An Eldar heir dares to call upon me without fear." I took a step forward, trying to sound steadfast. "I didn't summon you to take anything from me, but to tell me what awaits me if I break the covenant." The entity laughed, a laugh like the clang of iron. "If you break the covenant, a curse will fall upon your blood, the souls of your ancestors will be burned, and darkness will swallow you." I looked at him for a long time, then said, "And if I don't break it, I'll remain a slave forever. Isn't that so?" The entity was silent for a moment, then muttered, "Perhaps, but you're different from them. There's something light in you, and that worries us." When he said that, I felt I was approaching a truth I'd never imagined. For the first time, a demon acknowledged that I wasn't a carbon copy of my ancestors. For the first time, I saw fear in the enemy's eyes. I abruptly extinguished the candle, letting the entity evaporate into the darkness, muttering to myself, "I won't be an extension of them. I'll break the chain, even if it costs me my life." But deep down, I knew the real battle had yet to begin. The night that time wasn't like any other. It weighed heavier on my chest than a mountain slowly collapsing over my soul, as if the walls of the house that had always sheltered me were closing in on me, trying to swallow me up. I sat in my room, surrounded by a stifling silence, broken only by the creaking of the antique clock's hands, as if counting my last breaths. In front of me stood a rusty mirror I had inherited from my grandfather. A mirror that not only reflected features, but also revealed what was invisible to the eye. I stared at it for a long time, and was struck by a strange reflection, features that no longer resembled me. It was as if I were seeing another version of myself, one darker and more cruel. My eyes were sunk in dark pits, like two bottomless wells, swallowing every light that approached them. I extended my trembling hand to touch the mirror's cold surface, and I felt an unnatural coldness, a coldness like the touch of a dead hand reaching out from behind the glass. At that very moment, I heard a whisper creeping into my ear, a recurring whisper that pierced the silence of the room. "You won't be able to escape. We have been with you since your birth, and we will remain with you until your end." My body trembled like never before. I remembered what my mother had warned me about as a young child, when she would whisper to me as I lay in bed, that the blood of the family was bound by an ancient pact with demons, and that every generation was born with a ring of fire around its neck, invisible to the eye but slowly burning within the soul. I had thought it was a myth, but everything I experienced after my decision to repent made those words a stark reality. The demons began to pursue me in various forms. Sometimes they would creep like shadows on the walls. Sometimes they would come in strange voices creeping from the depths of the night, voices calling my name and laughing a dry, bone-piercing laugh. Other times, they would invade me in recurring dreams, where I would find myself in a blackened arena, surrounded by tongues of flame and smoke, the air filled with endless screams. There, men with distorted faces, half human, half demonic, surrounded me, laughing so loudly that my ears shook until I nearly lost my mind. That night, terror and curiosity drove me to my father's old room. He had always kept the keys from me, and when he died, they remained locked until I broke the lock with my trembling hands. Inside was a heavy wooden chest, smelling of old smoke. I opened it slowly and found what I had never dreamed of seeing: strange books filled with symbols and talismans, worn pages, and seals covered in brown stains that looked like blood that had dried centuries ago. My eyes fell on a sentence written in worn ink. "Whoever attempts to break the covenant shall be hunted not only in this world, but in all worlds." My breath quickened, and I realized that my repentance was not just a new beginning, as I had thought, but a declaration of war. It was no longer just a personal decision to abandon magic. It was a direct confrontation with a bloody legacy, with a curse whose roots ran deeper than I could imagine. Suddenly, in the midst of that deadly silence, I heard slow footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. However, the mirror in the corner of the room didn't reflect just me. It revealed another face, with strange features, its eyes blazing with red sparks like embers, and its mouth set in an inhuman smile, a smile that seemed to promise eternal torment. I tried to scream, but my voice choked in my throat, as if an invisible hand were gripping my neck. I felt caught between two worlds, the world of the living, fading away around me, and the world of shadows, slowly swallowing me up. Since that night, I've lost confidence in myself. I'm no longer sure if I'm still fully human, or if half of my soul has become theirs. And every time I looked in the mirror, that creature's face would smile back, reminding me that the end hadn't begun yet, but was near. I had no idea that the night could turn into a continuous nightmare, stretching above my head like a black, sunless sky. I lived within the walls of this ancient house, as if they were slowly closing in on me, one room after another, as if the house itself had become a prison woven by invisible hands. Every time I tried to convince myself that what was happening was nothing but an illusion or fleeting fantasies, the events would multiply before me like broken glass, each piece reflecting my face differently, and every attempt to put them together would hurt me more. On that particular night, we sat around the dinner table. A heavy silence hung over the place, even the sound of spoons seemed disturbing, as if knocking on doors we dared not open. I looked at my family members one by one. Pale faces, wandering eyes, blank stares searching for something mysterious beyond the confines of the room. My mother didn't eat a single bite, just staring into space as if hearing a whisper we couldn't hear. As for my father, he played his fingers on the wood with strange confusion, like someone counting the moments awaiting an inevitable fate. I couldn't stand it any longer, so I broke the silence, saying, "Why do we live as if we're prisoners? What's going on in this house?" But my words didn't bring an answer, they only stirred a pent-up anger. I saw their gazes turn mysteriously sharp, as if they were all sharing an unspoken secret. Suddenly, a violent knocking sounded on the front door. A heavy knocking, like the grip of a creature devoid of mercy. We all turned around in panic, and no one dared to rise. The knocking continued, growing louder by the second, until it seemed to shake the walls themselves. Finally, my father stood up hesitantly, as if his feet were being forced to drag. He opened the door slowly, but there was no one there. The corridor outside was engulfed in fog, writhing like smoky snakes. He quickly closed the door and returned, but his lips didn't say a word, only his eyes betrayed a hidden fear. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my room, watching the shadows move across the walls as if they were living beings. Sometimes I saw them converge, overlap, then suddenly separate, sometimes taking the shape of a hand or a mysterious face. Suddenly, I felt a chill creep into my ear, then a hoarse whisper pierced the stillness of the room. Your secrets are ours. You are not free. My body shuddered. I turned quickly, but saw nothing. Yet the voice repeated itself, this time clearer, until I could distinguish its words. I tried to stand up, but the air froze around me, and a stifling, musty smell filled the room, as if something rotten was rising from its grave. I realized I wasn't alone, that something shared the room with me. In the morning, I told my sister what had happened. She wasn't surprised, she merely gave me a cold smile and said in a cryptic tone, "You're just beginning to see what we've been seeing for a long time." My blood froze. Her words weren't a comfort, but an outright threat. Did the whole family know about this curse? Was I the only fool living in the shadows, unaware of the truth? I couldn't remain idly by. That day, I spent hours searching every corner of the house. Instinct led me to the basement, a place I always avoided. There, amidst the dust and darkness, I spotted a huge wooden box, covered with a network of rusty chains. The box was like a part of the earth itself, as if the house had been built over it to remain buried forever. I reached out with my trembling hand and touched it. At that moment, I felt a strange heat seep through my skin, a living warmth, as if the souls imprisoned inside were moving and pressing, begging to be released. I took a step back, but something inside me compelled me to open it. A mixture of fear and curiosity held me in place. I stood in front of it for a long time, torn between my desire to uncover the secret and my fear that this box was the gateway that would free all my nightmares. I knew that opening it might change everything, but at the same time, it might be the only way to understand the truth. Amidst that hesitation, a new voice crept in, a voice deeper and more terrifying than all the previous whispers, coming from inside the box itself. Open. We've waited centuries. My limbs froze. For the first time, I realized that I wasn't just facing a haunted house or phantom voices, but something greater, an ancient covenant that bound my blood to a dark circle that had yet to be broken. From that moment, I knew that my life would never be the same again. I was no longer just a human being searching for reassurance. I had become a participant in an ancient war between shadows and light, between a demonic covenant and a desperate will to survive. I no longer have a firm conviction about anything. Everything I once considered true is now just scattered fragments, crumbling before the creeping mystery that surrounds me from all sides. It's as if I live inside a dark labyrinth, its walls closing in on me whenever I try to escape, its floor shaking beneath my feet whenever I search for a way out. That night, I sat alone in my room, darkness swallowing everything around me except for the light of a candle that danced fearfully, as if it, too, feared going out. I tried to write down what I discovered, scattered words on yellowing paper groaning with age, just to keep the truth from getting lost in the maelstrom of events. But as I wrote, strange sounds filtered through the walls of the house, faint voices resembling whispers, as if the house itself were preserving old conversations it didn't want to erase. The walls were pulsing with life, as if bearing witness to secrets known only to them. At that moment, I realized that what surrounded my family wasn't merely the manipulation of hidden entities stalking us, but rather a heavy legacy spanning generations. A legacy like a black knot that runs through our blood like a slow poison, corrupting the soul before it corrupts the body. I began to connect the events. Each family member was hiding a small secret from the other, but when those secrets came together, they formed a vast network of collusion with unseen forces. When I left my room, I found my father sitting alone in the dark hall. He didn't look like himself, his eyes sunk in deep reverie, his body as still as a dead statue. I approached him, but he didn't turn around. He only whispered in a hoarse, barely audible voice. "We've been too late. Blood is beginning to exact its price." I felt a chill run through my veins. Did he mean blood shed in the past? Or were our souls now demanded as a tribute to an ancient covenant? I moved closer, and desperate boldness prompted me to ask, "Father, what do they want from us? Why us in particular?" He slowly raised his head, looked at me with eyes that shone with a strange gleam, a mixture of pain and resignation, and said, "Because we don't fully own ourselves. Half of our souls are ours, and the other half belongs to an ancient covenant signed centuries ago. We are not fully human." His words were like a dagger piercing deep within me. I no longer felt any ground beneath my feet. Was it possible that I was merely an extension of the curse, a small piece in a grand game controlled by unknown forces? That night, I didn't sleep. I moved between rooms, watching the shadows dance on the walls like living beings. The sounds grew clearer, whispers that remembered my name, cold laughter that cut through my silence like knives, and songs in an unknown language that carried within their letters a chill that stung my soul. When I returned to my room, I was shocked to find a black book on my desk. It hadn't been there a moment ago. Its cover was dark, devoid of any title, as if darkness itself was created to be its cover. I opened it with trembling hands and saw pages filled with strange symbols and names, yet they all seemed vaguely familiar, as if I'd seen them in an old dream or a recurring nightmare. When I reached the last page, my blood froze. In red script that looked like it was real blood, a short sentence was written. "It all begins when you speak your name among them." My entire body trembled. I realized I was standing on the edge of a deep abyss, one step enough to plunge me straight into the heart of the curse that surrounded us. But the question that haunted me continued: am I ready to face what awaits me in the darkness, or am I just another victim in an endless series of stolen lives? I didn't sleep that night, but sat by the window, watching the moon's reflection on the scattered trees at the edge of the forest. The night was eerily still, and every whisper of whine through the branches amplified my inner trembling. I tried to comprehend everything I had experienced since setting foot in this ominous house, but the density of my thoughts and obsessions made my head feel like a closed room filled with endless buzzing voices. How could one family keep so many dark secrets? How could humans succumb to the presence of demons among them and turn them into a means of survival and expansion? The more I tried to find a logical answer, the more I found myself sinking deeper into the mystery, as if I were searching a maze with no exit. At dawn, I could bear it no longer. I felt something inside me forcefully pushing me toward the cellar, as if a hidden call compelled me to return there, to the open wound that refused to heal. I descended with slow, ponderous steps, and each step of the stairs seemed to drag me deeper into the darkness. The air was unnaturally cold, as if the cellar held the chill of centuries of secrets and curses. But this time, things were different. The cellar wasn't as silent as I'd always known. Instead, there was a faint, intermittent whisper, as if hidden voices were arguing among themselves in a strange language I didn't know, a language resembling the groan of iron being crushed, or the creaking of rusty doors in a storm. I advanced cautiously until I discovered that the eastern stone wall wasn't entirely solid. Some stones protruded, others sunk, suggesting they weren't part of the original structure. I extended my trembling hand, and as soon as I touched the stones, I felt a chill unlike any I'd ever known, a chill that penetrated the skin and reached right to the bone. I pushed hard on one of the stones, and it moved like a secret key, opening a narrow, dark passageway I'd never seen before. That passageway felt like the stomach of an old house, slowly swallowing me up. The smell was suffocating, and the walls were filled with symbols carved with demonic precision. Symbols that seemed strangely familiar, as if whispering to me that I had known them for a long time. The deeper I walked into the corridor, the air grew heavier, and my chest tightened, until it seemed as if this place was rejecting my presence and expelling my breath. I reached a small circular hall at the end of the corridor, in the middle of which stood a massive black stone block shaped like an altar. The stone was saturated with a strange odor, a mixture of mold, smoke, and ancient blood. Around it lay unlit candles and clay bowls containing the remains of bones, some thin and small like animal bones, others larger and more reminiscent of human remains. I slowly approached the altar, my heart racing with every step. Suddenly, I felt movement behind me. I quickly turned around, but there was no one there. Yet the whisper returned, this time clearer than before, coiling around my head like a snake. You are not one of us. Come back before your soul is taken. Blood accepts no strangers. I felt fear creeping into my bones, but curiosity was stronger. I reached out and touched the black stone. At the same moment, a violent tremor swept through me, and I saw a succession of images lashing out at me like a storm. Mysterious rituals, people in demonic masks making sacrifices, muffled screams, blood being poured on this altar, and faces from the family that inhabited the house, but their features were different, harsh, dark, more like the faces of demons than humans. I quickly withdrew my hand, breathing heavily as if I had just emerged from underwater. I felt something embedded within me, a part of the darkness that had seeped deep within me and would never leave. I was no longer the same person who had entered the cellar. I hurried out of the hall, hearing whispers following me like a heavy shadow. My steps were quick, but the voices were even faster, laughing, repeating my name, and promising more. When I reached my room, I closed the door tightly and sat there trembling. The house was no longer an ordinary house, it had turned into a vast prison surrounded by unseen eyes. As I write these lines, I feel the walls watching me, the ceiling leaning closer to me, and darkness creeping deeper inside me. And worse still, I'm no longer sure if I'm still myself, or if I've become something else, slowly being born inside this body. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, staring into space as if searching for an answer that wouldn't come. The sky looked strange, its moon pale like a dying body, and the stars distant as if fleeing an approaching dark fate. The entire village was silent, but that silence wasn't a comfort, it was heavy, suffocating, punctuated every now and then by distant screams that dissolved into nothingness. I could hear whispers, not only from outside but also from within, as if hidden entities had found their way into my mind. Non-human footsteps echoed throughout the house, slow but heavy, as if those walking carried the burden of centuries of curses. I thought dawn would free me from this night, that light would rescue me from the jaws of terror, but with the first rays of morning, I found a letter outside the door that my eyes were never meant to see. A tattered piece of paper made of old leather, its scent resembling that of a long-opened grave. When I touched it, I felt a chill run through my fingers, as if it were stripping away my warmth. When I read what was written in crooked, inhuman script, my breath nearly stopped. We have chosen you. Your blood will open the doors for us. The words were short, but they weighed more than 1,000 books. My mind was filled with questions. Who chose me? What doors are they talking about? And why do I feel as if I've lived this moment before? Before I could find an explanation, my uncle entered the room. His face was exhausted, his eyes sunk in black shadows, as if night had slept in them for years. I didn't need to ask, he looked at the paper with eyes I knew so well, then muttered in a low voice. The curse is complete. Blood is the key, and you are the one who will hold the seal. I stepped back involuntarily, feeling the ground shake beneath my feet. I tried to deny it, but his words crept inside me, awakening a part of the truth I had been running away from. He approached me, placed his cold hand on my shoulder, and whispered, as if handing over a deadly secret. Centuries ago, our family made a pact with the forces of darkness. A pact that guaranteed our survival, in exchange for a sacrifice for each generation of one of their sons. This way, the family would not become extinct, and today, it's your turn. His words were a dagger, and I was the bound victim. I tried to scream, but my voice betrayed me. I wanted to curse him, to call him crazy, but he didn't need convincing. My heart betrayed me, beating frantically, as if something inside me already knew this was my fate. I fled. I left the house, running aimlessly, searching for an escape. The fields that had once been my refuge had become a trap, and the trees I'd grown accustomed to touching seemed twisted, like living creatures stretching out their branches to seize me. The familiar path was no longer the same, the distances were lengthening, the shadows moving despite the sunlight, and the wind carried a groan like the wailing of the dead. Suddenly, he appeared before me. An indescribable being, enormous in stature, his features obliterated, his face a black void from which hung wisps of smoke like burnt souls. His mouth didn't move, but his voice pierced my head, as if he were perched inside my skull. You will not escape. Your name has been written from the beginning. I fell to my knees, gasping like someone about to die. Between the desire to flee and the surrender to despair, I no longer knew who I was. Am I just a victim, a chess piece on an ancient board? Or am I the key, the final link that demons have waited for centuries to unlock doors that should never have been opened? It was day, but all I saw was darkness creeping around every corner. Light no longer meant safety. Silence no longer meant peace. Everything was upside down. Only then did I realize that the real question wasn't, how do I survive? But, what will happen to the world if I fail? I no longer distinguish between night and day inside this cursed palace. Time here doesn't flow like it does outside. It stops, loops around, and then brings me back to the same spot, as if I were trapped in a hellish cycle. The walls slowly bleed, streaks of dark blood seeping between the stones like pulsating arteries. Sometimes I thought that if I stuck to the wall, I would hear its pulse, the pulse of a living, hungry palace, swallowing whoever entered it, becoming a part of its body. The air was suffocating, saturated with the smell of rot mixed with the scent of smoke from no source. This smoke slowly creeps across the floor, like a living creature stalking my steps. Every time I tried to breathe, I felt my chest tighten, as if something wanted to block my air. I initially thought I would get used to what I was seeing, but I discovered that getting used to horror is just another form of madness. That day, I stood in front of a door I had never dared open before. It was covered in twisting black lines, resembling magical writing carved by a trembling hand. The more I looked at them, the more I felt a severe headache, as if the symbols themselves were penetrating my brain. I pushed the door open slowly, and a long creaking sounded like the groan of a dying person. The room was dark inside, but old portraits hung on the walls. I approached the first portrait, and it depicted an old man with distorted features, his eyes unnaturally wide, and his mouth formed a cold smile dripping with hatred. At first, I thought it was just a figment of my imagination, but when I moved a little, I saw those eyes slowly following me, as if alive. On the table in the center of the room lay an old book, its cover made of cracked leather and smelled of blood and smoke. On the cover was a circular symbol surrounded by the faces of small demons, their features raised as if they were preparing to laugh. I hesitantly extended my hand, and as soon as I touched the cover, I felt a stinging heat pierce my fingers and reach my veins. I opened the book, and the words moved like black worms writhing across the page. I struggled to read one of the lines, which read, "Whoever owns this book holds the key to summoning those who have resided within the family's blood for centuries." I froze. This was no ordinary book, but an eternal contract, a testament to a dark pact between the family and demons. Suddenly, I heard slow footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, but the room was empty. Still, I felt a cold breath pass over my neck, and a whisper echoed, "You're next." I slammed the book shut, and the walls shook. The paintings on the walls began to change shape, the human faces melted, turning into cracked skulls. Each image represented a different death, like prophecies. I ran toward the door to escape, but it slammed shut behind me with a force that shook the earth. I tried to open it with my trembling hands, but to no avail. Then I raised my head and saw what froze my blood. The old man in the first picture was no longer motionless. Half of his body emerged from the painting, extending his long black hand towards me. His fingers were like nails, and his face was skinless, mere bones covered in smoke. I backed away in terror until my back was against the wall, the book still in my hands. All I could muster was my survival instinct, so I held the book up in front of me as a shield. Suddenly, its pages lit up with a dim red light, and the old man's hand stopped in the air, a breath away from me. I heard his voice echoing in my head. "You are the heir of the blood, you will not escape." Then I realized the harsh truth. I was no longer just a lost witness to this nightmare. I had become part of the ritual, a piece of the curse my family had inherited centuries ago. The entire room began to close in on me, its walls closing in as if trying to swallow me up. But amid the terror, a strange strength arose within me, a rage mixed with deep despair. I swore that I would uncover the secret of this book, even if I had to come face to face with the demons. Because I'm starting to realize that the real horror hasn't even begun yet. Could no longer distinguish between night and day. Everything around me was immersed in a thick darkness. Even the sunlight filtering through the broken windows seemed dim, as if it were passing through a black veil that obscured all life. I lived in a whirl of visions and nightmares, and the house itself was no longer a home, but a passage between our world and another, as if the walls concealed hidden gates that opened only to those destined for doom. Every corner of this place concealed a whisper, every dark corner harboring a secret that didn't want to be revealed. I no longer slept. If I closed my eyes for a moment, I saw decaying faces approaching me, reeking of death and decay. Even the hallway mirror no longer reflected my image as it was, but rather strange faces watching me coldly, then disappearing as soon as I screamed or closed my eyes. One night, while sitting in the old family room, I heard a whisper approaching my ear. It wasn't clear, but it was like a disjointed chant, like a ritual recited in a distant basement. I looked around, but found no one. The air, however, was chilly, as if an invisible hand had passed over my skin, leaving a lasting chill. Then I realized that the demons had returned to remind me of their presence, to announce that they hadn't left me for a single moment, that they were just waiting for the right moment to devour me. I raised my gaze to the opposite wall and saw something strange, shadows moving on their own, as if dancing in the heavy silence. I approached them and realized that they weren't just shadows, but distorted shapes, featureless faces, their eyes glowing like embers in a terrifying night. I tried to back away, but my legs froze in place, as if the ground had swallowed them, or as if the walls had sucked my breath away and bound me to their stony coldness. Suddenly, a loud scream split my head in two. It wasn't a human scream, it came from depths whose source I didn't know, from a place far beyond hell itself. I covered my ears, but the sound pierced me from within, hammering at my skull until I felt it would crack. I fell to the ground and saw the world change. The walls peeled away, revealing their living layers. The floor filled with cracks from which thick black smoke poured. The ceiling seemed to melt, dripping red blood onto my face. I began to crawl, searching for an exit at any cost, but wherever I turned, I found shadows surrounding me, chasing me like hungry wolves. I heard voices laughing mockingly, voices repeating my name as if they'd known it for thousands of years, as if calling me to a dark abyss from which there was no return. In a moment of utter despair, I stopped resisting. I closed my eyes, resigned to what was about to happen. But when I opened it again, I found myself in a dark room unlike any I'd ever known. The walls were covered in strange, deeply engraved symbols, each one oozing a faint red light, like living, pulsating hearts. In the center of the room lay a huge, open book, its pages black and its letters glowing like fire, devouring the air around them. I approached it despite the terror that gripped me. The words on the pages moved, twisting and intertwining, like living creatures crawling across the paper. I tried to read them, but they weren't in any language I knew. Yet, I felt them speaking directly to me, their meanings burning into my mind like fire in my flesh. Every word was read by my soul, not my eyes, and every sentence carved a new scar into my chest. Suddenly, the whisper came to me again, but this time it was as clear as a sword. You have reached the point of no return. I turned quickly and saw a shadow taller than any human, creeping from the wall like smoke, then gradually taking shape until it had a body, a distorted face riddled with scars. His black eyes were like holes, swallowing up all light, and his voice, when he spoke, made the ground tremble beneath him. The book has chosen you, and you will be left with no choice. Either you complete the path, or you will be erased from existence. He moved closer, until I could feel his cool breath on my face. I couldn't move, but my heart was screaming, pounding violently in my chest. When I looked back at the book, I found it had closed by itself, and on its cover appeared my name written in blood, as if my fate had been sealed forever. At that moment, I realized that I was no longer merely a witness to the family curse, but rather a part of its black thread, and my own blood became the ink between the pages of that book. As the words glowed brighter and brighter before me, I felt that the blood in my veins was no longer my own, but a fire coursing through me, slowly transforming me into something else, something no longer human. I could no longer distinguish the contours of my body from the shadows surrounding me. I stood in front of the mirror, the red symbols still glowing on the walls of the room, like the breaths of living creatures feeding off my soul, breathing in and exhaling a dark red vapor that filled the space with strange odors, the smells of burning and rotten blood. The room was no longer just four walls, it had transformed into a living entity watching me with an invisible eye. The black book was still in my hands, but my hands themselves no longer looked human. My fingers began to lengthen unnaturally, writhing like the claws of an unknown beast, and my nails grew hard and black, like iron cutting the air. My veins bulged and began to move beneath my skin like rabid snakes, crisscrossing, intertwining, and biting each other, until I felt as if my blood was no longer my own but a boiling poison within me. A terrible heat invaded my body, not human heat, but a hellish fire raging in every cell of me. My heart no longer beat normally, it pounded like a hammer against an anvil, and with each beat my bones creaked, making a strange crack as if my body was disintegrating from within to be reshaped. I couldn't stand, so I fell to the ground and screamed, but it wasn't a human scream. It was a long howl, as if all the wolves had gathered in my throat and screamed instead of me. The mirror in front of me no longer merely reflected my image, it had become a window into another world. Many faces appeared in it, distorted faces, smiling cold, poisonous smiles, as if waiting for my final mask to fall off. One face came so close it was pressed against the mirror glass. It looked terrifyingly like me, a dark version of me, but its eyes were as red as boiling blood, and its mouth was filled with long, sharp fangs, dripping with sticky black saliva. I heard his voice address me coldly, as if he knew all my weaknesses. Didn't you long to be born again? This weak human body isn't worthy of you. You were different from the start. You've always been a stranger, and now is the time to show your true colors, to be free. I tried to scream, no. I'm not you. I'm still human. But my voice came out distorted, a mixture of wheezing and heavy breathing, as if my throat had become a mouthpiece for darkness. Suddenly, I felt my shoulders being torn apart from the inside, as if my bones were crumbling to make way for something new. I screamed, blood spurting from my back, bleeding profusely, and my skin slowly crackling. In the shadows, I saw black shapes emerging and reappearing, like huge, pulsating wings, but not yet fully formed. They surrounded me, swirling around me as if they wanted to swallow me, as if they were waiting for the right moment to snatch away the last vestiges of my humanity. The black book suddenly opened violently, its pages turning rapidly until it stopped on a completely black page, written in glowing blood. You have been chosen. There is no turning back. I tried to throw it away, but my hand stuck to it, my skin fused with it, and the book became a part of me. I tried to scream again, but the feeling of the dark force was stronger than my fear. All my veins glowed the same terrifying red that covered the walls, and I began to feel that I was no longer myself, that something else was stirring inside me. I fell to the ground, blood dripping from my nose, ears, and eyes. My sight began to see beyond the darkness. The walls were no longer walls, but opened onto a vast, endless abyss, a black void teeming with endless screams, with burning souls screaming my name. Thousands of whispers intertwined in my head, repeating my name over and over, beckoning me to take the first step toward nothingness. With difficulty, I raised my head and looked in the mirror, but I didn't see myself. I saw the being who had always watched me from afar, standing right where I was. He was smiling a devilish smile with his mouth open, his fangs dripping with hot blood, his eyes burning like embers. He slowly raised his hand, and I did the same, as if we had become one. And only then did I realize the horrific truth. There was no longer any difference between me and him. Only a moment separated us. The moment of complete fusion. The nights I spent inside the palace were only the beginning of a descent that was longer and deeper than I had anticipated. As the days passed, the walls began to lose their meaning as walls, and every corner of the place throbbed with a strange, inexplicable presence. By the 30th night, I felt I was no longer living among humans. Everything around me had transformed into a continuous nightmare, as if sleep and wakefulness were no longer distinct but had merged to create a reality from which there was no escape. That night, I awoke to the sound of loud knocking on my bedroom door. The knocking wasn't ordinary, it was more like a muffled thunderclap, insistently recurring, as if something was demanding my soul back. The knocking quickened, then began to pound the door with increasing violence, until I felt the wood would explode at any moment. My heart pounded in sync, each knock met with a shock in my chest. I stood up hesitantly, my hands trembling and my knees barely able to support me. Every step toward the door felt like it was leading me into the mouth of a deep abyss. As I placed my hand on the cold handle, the knocking suddenly stopped, and everything receded into a deathly silence, a silence so heavy it choked my breath. I didn't open it. I retreated fearfully to the center of the room, trying to convince myself that it was just an illusion. Suddenly, a voice whispered near my ear, a voice warm and unbearably close, as if it came from within me. We've reached the end, and you no longer have the option of turning back. I could no longer bear the room. I opened the door and fled down the long corridor. The corridor stretched endlessly, its damp floor echoing with my footsteps as if they were chasing me. Along its sides were many doors, some opening into a black void like a hole swallowing the light, others into rooms filled with muffled screams, the screams of women and children echoing from afar, and some into scenes from a past I'd forgotten I'd lived. I saw myself as a child sitting in a dark room, staring at an endlessly bare wall, and I saw my mother crying silently by the window, while behind her a tall shadow reached out toward her. Each door was a cursed story, and each scene ripped a piece of my mind apart. I tried to run, but the further I advanced, the longer the corridor grew, as if I were stuck in a vicious circle. Finally, a massive door appeared before me, larger than any other. It was made of burnt wood, dripping with ash, and its rusty door swayed as if it were breathing. I hesitated for a moment, but an invisible force pulled me toward it, as if I were bound by invisible chains. As soon as my hand touched the handle, the door opened by itself, with a sharp creak that pierced my ears. Behind it, a vast hall appeared, bathed in a blood-red light emanating from nowhere. Bodies hung from rusty chains from the ceiling, moving lightly in a current of air I couldn't feel, as if they were breathing or whispering amongst themselves. The smell of decay and blood filled the space, and my stomach felt like it was teetering. In the center of the hall stood me. Another version of myself, with the same features but a crooked smile distorting my face, his eyes completely black, like two bottomless abysses. He smiled and said in a voice that sounded exactly like mine, but it was hollow, echoing like an echo from another world. "You're too late, everything is starting to end." I walked toward him fearfully, but each step made my body feel heavier, as if the earth was trying to swallow me or as if the gravity of the hall was bound to my soul alone. The closer I got, the more I felt my soul being torn from my body, as if something was reaching inside my chest to tear me out. The other version of me didn't move, but stood there, smiling, as if waiting for my final mask to fall. Suddenly, the red light went out, and the hall was swallowed up in complete darkness. But the voices didn't disappear. Thousands of whispers crept into my mind, then turned into intermittent screams, the screams of men, women, and children, as if trapped inside me. I tried to close my ears, but the screams were coming from within, ravaging me from within. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself sitting on the floor, exhausted. The other version had disappeared, but in its place stood a huge mirror covering half the hall. I approached it hesitantly, and saw my distorted image, my eyes empty like two dark holes, and a sinister smile on my lips. I raised my hand to touch the mirror's surface, trying to convince myself that it was just a reflection, but the hand touched me from the inside out first. A cold hand emerged from the glass and gripped my wrist with a terrifying force, a force that made every muscle in my body tremble. Only then did I realize that I wasn't facing a nightmare, but the beginning of the end. That what I had thought was my shadow, my reflection, was nothing but reality, and I was nothing but an illusion. I stood in front of the shattered mirror in the narrow corridor, a chill creeping through my veins as if the entire house had become a vast grave. My face was reflected in the shards of glass, shattered and distorted, as if I no longer knew who I was. I didn't see the features I was used to, but a strange face, as if waiting for the right moment to rise from the glass and take my place. I looked into my eyes and saw them drowned in a strange redness, as if I hadn't slept in years, as if all the sleepless nights had gathered inside them, turning them into two smoldering embers. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, hoping to find a moment of calm, but the sound returned again, that fragmented whisper, filled with ragged breaths, approaching my ear, as if someone was standing right behind me, extending their lips to my neck and breathing inside me. I turned around quickly, my heart nearly piercing my chest, and all I saw was darkness creeping between the walls, as if the house itself was emptying its veins of light and filling them with black blood. I am Rock. I kept repeating my name to myself, as if repeating it would protect me from collapsing, would prevent me from dissolving into this madness besieging me from all sides. But every time I said my name, the house echoed in a strange way, not just one echo, but several voices, each one repeating it with a different accent, as if multiple people were repeating it behind the walls, laughing at my attempt to cling to what was left of me. I stepped forward, the floor creaking beneath my feet as if the house was in pain from my passing. The creaking was like a long groan, as if the wood itself was trying to whisper to me, "Leave before it's too late." But I couldn't stop. The corridor led me to my grandmother's room, the room I hadn't dared to enter since her departure. Since the night they buried her, I'd avoided even looking toward her door, but now, something drew me toward her. An invisible hand, cold as ice, pushed the door open from the inside, and it slowly opened, creaking as if dying. Its creaking crept into my ear like a blade piercing my nerves. I entered. The room was as I'd left it, but time itself seemed frozen. The bed was in place, covered with a dirty white sheet, with pale yellow stains like dried blood or old tears. Strewn across the pillow were strands of gray hair, still dry, as if they'd been left deliberately to remind me that she was still here, watching over me. The smell of mold mixed with the scent of old medicine filled my nostrils, and I felt as if I'd stepped back years. I approached with trembling steps and sat on the edge of the bed. As soon as I touched the mattress, I felt a strange heaviness, as if someone had sat beside me. The skin on my arms tingled, and the air felt heavier. The room, despite its silence, seemed filled with invisible breath. I slowly raised my head and saw the huge closet in the corner open of its own accord. Its doors didn't move like a normal door, but slowly parted, like the lips of a smiling monster. From inside, darkness began to seep in like a thick black liquid, creeping across the floor and swallowing up the moonlight that filtered through the window. And in the midst of this darkness, two eyes. Just two eyes, suspended in the void, wide, fixed on me, unblinking, unmoving. Their whites were pale, their blacks glinting like wet embers. I shivered, and the cold bit my fingers. I tried to speak, but my voice choked in my throat. I could only whisper, "Who are you?" The eyes didn't move, but I heard the answer inside my head, as if it came from within me, in the same tone, only slower and heavier. "I am you, after you lose control." I screamed and quickly stepped back, hitting the wall, and the room shook around me. It was as if the house was closing in on me, as if the walls were breathing and drawing closer, trying to swallow me up. The ceiling tilted, the floor trembled, and everything became a living nightmare that I couldn't stop. I ran out of the room, panting as if I were escaping imminent death. The corridor seemed longer than usual, endless, and the walls on either side were covered with black hands emerging from within, trying to grab me. The door I knew led outside began to recede further away from me the closer I got, as if the house itself had decided it wouldn't leave me alive. I stopped suddenly, not by choice. My body no longer obeyed me. It was as if something had pulled at my sinews from within and forced me to remain still. The cold was like knives digging into my skin, slowly tearing me apart. And from behind me, I heard slow, heavy, steady footsteps, approaching. I didn't dare turn around. I knew that what was approaching wasn't a human. As the footsteps touched my ear, I heard the whisper again, this time clearer and closer, until I felt saliva running down my neck. "You won't escape, Rock. This house has become your blood." I fell to my knees, my eyes brimming with tears, fear squeezing my chest as if a giant hand were pressing down on my heart. For the first time, I felt that I was no longer the sole narrator of this story. Something else was writing it with me, something inhabiting the house, dictating my end before I even reached it. From the moment I set foot in the palace, I felt that time had lost its meaning. I could no longer distinguish between day and night, as if the sun and moon had decided to leave the sky empty. Minutes became hours, and hours became days, while the days themselves meant nothing but the silent extension of a long agony. I lived within a dark vortex, with blurred visions, scattered voices, and memories crumbling before me as if they weren't mine, but rather the remnants of stories whose owners had died centuries ago, their souls trapped here waiting to be retrieved. The palace itself seemed like a living being, breathing through the walls, watching me from the windows, and swallowing up every attempt at understanding. Sometimes I would hear the pounding of a huge heart echoing from beneath the floors, as if I were living on the chest of a sleeping monster just waiting to open its eyes. That particular night, as I sat by the high window overlooking the deserted orchard, I felt something strange creeping deep within me. I saw movement among the dry grass. At first, I thought it was just an illusion or a shadow. But when I focused my eyes, it was clearly visible, a person walking slowly, his body swaying, his steps uneven, as if his bones were broken and his joints disjointed. I screamed to myself, impossible. No one lives here but me. But the person continued to approach, until the moonlight revealed his features. I gasped, my blood running cold. The face was mine. Another version of me, but shattered, with sunken eyes filled with nothing but bloodshot blackness, and a mouth dripping with ink-black saliva. My hands trembled, trying to convince myself that it was just another hallucination, a distorted image concocted by my sick mind. But the replica didn't disappear. Instead, it raised its head toward me and smiled that cruel smile that made me tremble as if a volcano had erupted inside me. I slammed the window shut and stepped back, my chest rising and falling as if I'd been running non-stop for hours. Then the knocking started, softly at first, then it got louder. One knock after another, until it sounded like a continuous slapping against the glass. I didn't dare turn around, but curiosity nearly killed me. When I turned my head, I found nothing behind the window. Instead, I found him inside the room. He was standing beside me, motionless, like a black statue emitting smoke. I asked him in a trembling, barely audible voice, "Who are you?" He answered in a voice that sounded exactly like mine, but deeper and harsher, as if the echo of a demon residing inside me. "I'm the other Rock. I'm the one you left behind when you tried to forget." I didn't understand his words, but my heart pounded so violently that I felt it would leap out of my chest. I extended my trembling hand to touch him. My fingers easily penetrated his body, as if I were touching thick smoke. Yet, I felt a chill run through my veins, a chill unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. He whispered to me as he leaned closer, until I could almost smell the putrid stench of decay escaping his mouth. "Don't think you'll survive. Everything you've seen is just the beginning. The palace didn't choose you in vain. It wants something from you, and it won't let you go until you give it what it wants." Then he suddenly disappeared, leaving behind a long, piercing laugh that shook the walls, windows, and doors. It was as if the entire palace was laughing with me and at me simultaneously. I fell to the floor, my body dripping with sweat, and I was about to faint hadn't more whispers penetrated my ears. There were many voices, overlapping, some laughing with muffled laughter, some crying with sharp sobs, and some saying my name in the voices of little children, with a distorted innocence that made me tremble more than any scream. I tried to scream to silence them, but my voice choked in my throat. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't close my eyes for even a second. I sat staring at the walls, which began to move like curtains, and the shadows that danced like living beings, constantly changing their shapes, sometimes wolves, sometimes eyeless faces, sometimes hands reaching out towards me and disappearing. From that moment on, I began to fear myself more than I feared the palace. Every time I looked in the mirror, I feared seeing the other Rock smiling at me from within, reminding me that I wasn't alone, that what I was experiencing might be the only truth, while I was just a passing copy, a copy waiting to be erased. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a moment. Every time I tried to close my eyes, the images returned stronger, clearer, and more painful. Faces sunk in darkness, dead eyes staring at me, and open mouths screaming soundless screams, screams exploding inside me, as if coming from my very soul. The air in the room became heavy, saturated with cold humidity, and smelled of damp earth resembling the stench of graves. I was breathing with difficulty, as if I were trapped deep in a bottomless well. I approached the large window, the window I had thought of as my refuge. I looked out into the dark forest stretching behind the house, a forest that looked to me like a huge monster opening its mouth to swallow anyone who dared look at it. Its trees were not ordinary, they moved without a wind, their branches twisting like broken bodies seeking salvation. Suddenly, in the midst of the blackness, I caught sight of two eyes, two red eyes that glowed like embers that hadn't been extinguished for centuries, fixed on me without blinking. He wasn't an animal. He was taller than any human, slender, and still, watching me as if he knew every hidden secret inside me. I shuddered and stepped back, but the walls began to shake. At first, they were soft, then they turned into distinct knocks, as if something were slowly creeping inside the walls, digging its way into me with long claws. I pressed against the wall, straining my ears, and suddenly I heard them, whispers. Whispers emerging from the cracks, repeating my name like a cursed chant. "Rock! Rock! You've been too late." My limbs trembled. I tried to convince myself that this was another illusion, but the voices grew clearer. They were no longer just whispers, but real voices telling stories, stories of the dead. They spoke to me as if I were one of them, telling me how they entered this house and never came out, how they were trapped within its walls, and how some of them were buried alive in its dark corners, their screams serving as food for the insatiable palace. I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped up and yanked the door open violently to escape the room. But the corridor I saw wasn't the same corridor. It was long, longer than ever, stretching endlessly. The floor was peeling, and the walls were pulsing like living flesh. Black hands protruded from the cracks, their fingers long and cold, trying to grab me as I advanced. I ran with all my might, the sounds behind me amplifying, shrill laughter, children's cries, muffled screams, until I nearly lost my mind. Suddenly, everything stopped. There at the end of the corridor was a huge mirror I'd never seen before. I stood in front of it slowly, panting, my heart about to explode. I looked into the mirror and saw myself. Or at least, something like me. It was a pale, dead face, with bloodshot eyes and black, peeling lips. He smiled a cold smile and said, in a voice similar to mine but deeper and harsher, "You're just a shadow. The real narrator is me." Then he reached out from inside the mirror. His fingers pierced the surface of the glass as if it were water, and he grabbed my arm. I felt an inhuman coldness, as if I were touching a grave opened thousands of years ago. He pulled me hard, and the room vanished, the corridor disappeared, and everything turned to an infinite blackness. I tried to resist, but my strength slowly evaporated. At the last moment, I screamed with everything I had left inside, pushing myself backward with desperate force. I fell to the ground, and the mirror exploded into thousands of shards. But the nightmare wasn't over. Each tiny shard reflected another image of me, distorted faces, laughing coldly, whispering simultaneously. "You won't escape, Rock. You've become one of us." I sat amidst the broken glass, my breath ragged, my body trembling, my eyes staring at the shards that surrounded me. Each reflection was a copy of me, but I no longer knew which one was me. Which one was the original? At that moment, I realized that I was no longer afraid of the palace alone, but of myself, of my reflections, of the truth that might be even more hideous than I had imagined, that I had never been just another ghost in the game of this cursed house. Tonight was unlike any other night. I found myself in a world where everything around me was slowly collapsing, as if the earth itself could no longer accommodate my steps. The walls of the house were nothing but crumbling evidence of a long tragedy, and the forest nothing but an endless maze of echoes and shadows. But I had no idea that what awaited me that night would transcend the bounds of human comprehension. The house was immersed in an eerie silence, a silence that pressed against my chest like a heavy boulder. The clock had been stopped for days, or perhaps weeks, and I could no longer distinguish whether time had passed or not. I was sitting on the worn wooden chair when I suddenly heard the creaking of the back door. I swear I had locked it with my hand before sitting down, yet it seemed as if something had forced it open. I hesitated, but a dark curiosity overcame me. I stepped out into the corridor, and the air was painfully cold, stinging my face like tiny needles. Every breath I exhaled turned into a white vapor that quickly vanished. I took hesitant steps toward the courtyard, searching with my eyes for the source of the sound. There, at the doorstep, something strange caught my attention. The ground was wet, even though the sky was clear and it hadn't rained in days. Then I saw those footprints, huge footprints, larger than human feet, bearing a distorted combination of claws and hooves. I froze, but something inside me compelled me to follow them, as if a mysterious force was gripping my body and moving me like a puppet. The path led me into the forest. The trees looked different this time, twisted, tangled, as if bending to block my path. From among the branches, I heard vague whispers, voices I couldn't understand but that instilled fear in my heart. I raised my head and saw distorted faces peeking out from between the branches, faceless, but with the feeling that they saw me more clearly than any human. I continued walking, my steps sinking into the damp earth, until I found myself standing in front of an old wooden hut I had never seen before. Although I had traversed this forest many times, this place did not exist. The hut was dark except for a small window from which emanated a dim red light, a strange light that was neither fire nor lamps, but more like the beating of a living heart. I advanced slowly, and the closer I got, the more I felt the ground shake beneath my feet, as if warning me not to continue. But I didn't stop. I placed my hand on the hut door, and it opened automatically with a sharp groan, like the scream of a soul trapped for centuries. A suffocating air, smelling of burning flesh, rushed in, suffocating me for a moment. I entered, and that's when the real nightmare began. The interior was dark except for candlelight, and the walls were all painted with strange symbols, carved in blood, repeated ritually. In the center of the room was a large chalk circle, inside of which lay a mutilated corpse, lying face down. I approached fearfully and saw writing on its back, deeply etched into the flesh. I bent down to read, and my blood froze. Rock. Welcome to your new home. My whole body shuddered. Who wrote this? Who knows my name here? Before I could comprehend, a low laugh erupted out of nowhere. It didn't come from a person, but from the walls, the floor, the very air I breathed. Then suddenly, the corpse moved. It raised its head with frightening slowness and turned toward me with a face devoid of features, just smooth, stretched skin, which slowly began to crack, until my own face emerged from it. I saw myself there, both dead and alive at the same time, smiling a smile I'd never known before, a cold, sinister smile. I screamed, trying to back away, but the door slammed shut behind me. The corpse, or rather, my dark version of me, stood up and began approaching me with heavy steps, each step accompanied by the sound of bones crunching. When it was right in front of me, I spoke in my own voice. You will no longer be the narrator, Rock. I will be the one to complete the story. I froze. I tried to raise my hands to defend myself, but they trembled as if I'd lost control. I turned toward the hut's window and saw my own reflection, but they weren't my own. They were completely black, like two bottomless pits. That's when I realized this was more than just a passing terror. That hut wasn't an ordinary place, it was a trap, specifically designed to replace me with something else, a dark version of me, one that knew neither mercy nor humanity. Ever since that night, I no longer knew if I was still Rock, or if the other entity had begun writing my story for me. Sat in the middle of a dark room, where time no longer held any meaning. The clock hands had disappeared, or perhaps I could no longer see them. The walls I had known yesterday seemed strange, breathing slowly as if they possessed invisible lungs, and the faded paint was like swaying flesh. Even the colors were no longer colors, but gray patches that moved and swirled around me as if watching me. The shadows on the floor and walls were no longer motionless as I had grown accustomed to. They moved slowly, consciously, as if enjoying my suffering, as if waiting for the right moment to swallow me up. I tried to convince myself that this was just an illusion, that my mind was concocting these images out of exhaustion, but something seemed more real than I could deny. I felt that the house itself had changed. It was no longer mine, no longer a place of life, but part of an unknown curse, a curse throbbing in every wall and every corner. My body, too, was no longer mine. I would look at my hands and find them trembling without my control, my fingers moving as if invisible strings were pulling them apart. Sometimes I would raise my head even though I didn't want to, as if a strange inner force was controlling me. Even myself, the entity I thought was stable and independent, was shattered. The voices inside me that had been vague whispers were now clear, screaming, as if they were being broadcast directly into my ear. Let go of yourself. Don't resist. We are stronger than you. Let us possess you. I resisted with all my might, but the resistance itself became painful and exhausting. Every attempt to hold on to my consciousness was like sinking deeper into a bottomless black sea. Sometimes I felt as if I were detached from my body, a mere spectator watching my hands move and smile a smile that had never been mine. Sometimes I heard a laugh escape my mouth, but it wasn't my own laughter. My insides were screaming, but the sound didn't reach the outside world. In a moment of despair, I walked past the mirror. There I found the most terrifying truth. My reflection no longer resembled me. There was another man, pale, with sunken eyes, staring at me from within, smiling with a cold sneer. I wanted to shout at him, "I am rock. This is my body. This is my mind." But my mouth remained silent, only a distorted smile emerging. It was my reflection that moved, whispering in a deep, terrifying voice, "You are just a shell, and we are coming to fill the void." My breathing quickened, and I felt the ground disappearing beneath me. I began to lose more and more control. I could no longer distinguish when I was controlling my steps and when my limbs were being led away against my will. I could hear my footsteps receding into the house, but I wasn't the one deciding the direction. I was opening doors involuntarily, writing strange words on the walls without realizing their meaning. When I looked again at what I had written, I saw cryptic symbols, distorted circles, and featureless faces. Slowly, the truth began to dawn on me. I was no longer alone in this body. There was another entity, feeding on my weakness, expanding inside me every moment I lost control. He wasn't completely foreign to me, but rather like my own dark shadow, a distorted version of myself I'd ignored all my life. Now, this version was stronger, more ferocious, and I was merely a ghost fading before it. The nights were the cruelest. With each sunset, I felt the darkness give him additional power, fueling him with a dark energy that sucked the last remnants of my will from within me. My body trembled like someone struck by a deadly fever, my chest tightened, my mind cracked, and even my breath was no longer my own. I felt like a mere puppet, its strings in unknown hands, being dragged to a fate from which I had no escape. In the darkest moments, a terrifying question crept into me. Do I really want to continue resisting? Do I want to remain a prisoner of this eternal war within my body? Or would surrender be less painful? For the first time, I didn't know the answer. I began to feel as if I was no longer myself. My name, Rock, no longer meant anything. It was merely a distant echo fading into a dark inner void, as if I were hearing my name from underwater, echoing meaninglessly, lifelessly. With each passing moment, something was slowly pulling me deeper, tearing at the threads of my will as if I were a straw doll lying on the ground. My steps were no longer my own. I found myself walking without decision, as if the earth itself were pushing me towards an unknown destination. My hands trembled, and sometimes they rose slowly into the air, as if an invisible force were controlling them. I heard whispers rising from my chest, words I had never spoken, sounds in strange languages I didn't understand, but they stuck in my mind like needles, leaving a painful echo inside me. I tried to resist, but resistance became like trying to hold on to air. The more I gripped myself, the more it slipped through my fingers. The more I held on to my consciousness, the deeper I felt I was drowning in an endless black sea. My face in the mirror no longer reflected my true self, but something else, something that looked like me on the outside, but smiled when I cried and calmed down when I screamed. Many times I sat in the dark for hours, watching my reflection breathe while I held my breath. It blinked when I closed my eyelids and smiled when I bit my lip in fear. As time passed, I became unsure. Was it me looking in the mirror, or was the mirror revealing who I was inside? The voices around me changed. I could no longer distinguish between my inner voice and the voice of the other within me. At first, it whispered, like a sad, never-ending song. Then it began to command me clearly, its voice harsh, sharp, and unquestionable. And eventually, I found myself unconsciously carrying out its orders. One night, I woke up with my hands covered in dirt, my nails dirty, and my heart pounding. I didn't remember anything, but I found a deep hole in the garden, a hole I didn't know for whom I'd dug it, nor why. The people around me became strangers. My friends, my family, everyone I loved began to evoke an aversion I couldn't understand. When they called me Rock, I felt repulsive, as if they were addressing someone long dead. Their faces felt cold, their voices piercing my head like sharp blades. With every moment of surrender, I felt myself disappearing further and further. My interior was like a room where the lights were turned off one by one, leaving me in total darkness. Even my body was no longer my own. Sometimes I would wake up to find traces of blood under my fingernails, strange wounds on my palms, and my clothes torn. But worst of all, I couldn't remember a thing. I would repeatedly ask myself, is there still such a thing as me? Or had I turned into an empty shell, a soulless body, a vessel inhabited by another being? But as time passed, strangely, I was no longer as afraid as I had been in the beginning. On the contrary, I felt comfortable letting it lead me. I no longer had to decide. I no longer had to endure my inner struggle or my weakness. Surrender was no longer an option. It was a way out of my torment. Deep down, I realized something terrifying. The rock I had known was dead. What remained was not a human being, but a rebirth of something else, something slowly emerging from within me but firmly taking root, as if waiting for the moment to fully declare its existence. My role was over. I was merely a witness to my own end. I could no longer distinguish between what was happening inside me and what was around me. It was as if the boundaries between my private world and external reality had suddenly collapsed. My body had become a silent battlefield, every nerve trembling as if fighting an invisible enemy. My mind, however, had transformed into a city plunged in darkness, its streets empty, its lights out, and unfamiliar voices echoing between its crumbling walls. I could hear intertwined whispers, some shouting at me commandingly, "Surrender, you no longer have a place here." Others faintly pleading, "Resist. Don't let it take you." The struggle wasn't between me and the world, but between me and myself, or rather, between me and that thing that had settled inside me. I sat in my room, sweat covering my face, my breath racing like someone suffocating underwater. My hands trembled hysterically, uncontrollably. When I looked up at the mirror opposite me, I didn't see my image as I had grown accustomed to. There was another shadow. It looked exactly like me, a copy of me, but its eyes weren't mine. They were deep, black, bottomless eyes, looking at me as if burrowing deep inside to uncover all my secrets. That face smiled, while I suffocated in terror, unable even to scream. At that moment, my body began to betray me. My limbs no longer responded to my commands. I tried to stand up, but my legs remained stuck to the ground like the roots of an ancient tree. My fingers moved on their own, slowly, as if a strange force was testing them like a child trying out a new toy. Then a faint laugh escaped my mouth, a laugh I didn't recognize. It was coming from my throat, but it wasn't my voice. The night passed long, sleepless. I lay in bed, my eyes wide open until they were burning. I watched the shadows creeping up the walls. They weren't just an optical illusion, they were really moving, stretching, swirling around the room like living creatures searching for prey. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I heard a deep, cold voice whispering my name. "Rock, you're not you anymore." I shivered violently, feeling a cold current ripple through my veins. Then a black fog seeped in from the corners of the room. It had no source, but it slowly crept in until it covered everything. Amid the fog, distorted faces began to appear, some of them terrifyingly familiar. They were the faces of people who had passed away from my life, dead, but laughing and suffering at the same time, as if trapped in an eternal hell. I realized then that I had lost all control. My breath was no longer my own, nor were my steps, nor even my thoughts. Something else was controlling me, feeding off my weakness, creeping through my veins like poison through blood. I tried to scream, but my voice came out hoarse and distorted, as if my throat had turned into a rusty machine. And suddenly, loud knocks shook the door. 3 violent blows, as if coming from the heart of my nightmare. My heart nearly stopped. I didn't dare move, I couldn't even breathe. The door slowly opened, its creaking piercing my ears like knives. Through the opening, no one entered, but darkness itself. The darkness moved like a living thing, creeping toward me, stretching its black limbs to surround me. At that moment, I didn't resist. For the first time, I felt that surrender was easier than a struggle. I raised my head, and words escaped my mouth that I hadn't chosen. I am not alone anymore. My lips smiled, even though I didn't want to, and a chill crept into my heart until it felt like it had stopped beating. Only then did I understand the harsh truth, that my end wasn't coming. No. My end had already begun. No longer knew whether minutes, hours, or perhaps entire days had passed while I was trapped inside this hell. Time here was no longer measured by hands or minutes, but by the weight of the silence and the depth of the shadows. I was walking in a long, endless corridor, its walls breathing like a living being, black fluids flowing from them, glinting under a dim, unknown light. I could hear whispers echoing from every direction, soft, overlapping voices, sometimes close as if whispering in my ear, sometimes distant as if emanating from deep within the earth. Rock, rock, it's time. The words were like a cold stab, seeping into my veins instead of blood. I tried to cover my ears, but it was no use. The voices weren't just external, they were internal, coursing through my blood, confusing my heartbeat, and filling my lungs with heavy, poisonous air. Every time I took a step forward, I felt the earth itself grip me, as if pulling me deeper into it. My feet moved, but not of my own volition, as if I were just a tattered puppet with invisible strings. My fingers trembled on their own, my shoulders resisted something that didn't exist, and my mouth began to mutter words I couldn't understand, a strange language flowing from within me without permission. At the end of the corridor, there was a rusty mirror, slightly tilted, as if it had been placed specifically for me to wait for. I hesitated, trying to ignore it, but curiosity mixed with terror drew me toward it like prey being dragged into the mouth of a beast. I looked up, and there I froze. My reflection wasn't my own. I could see my own face, but with strange features, skin as pale as a dead body, eyes sunken in a thick blackness like holes to another world, and my mouth was painted in a distorted, cold smile, a smile I'd never known. The most terrifying thing was that my reflection didn't match my movement. When I raised my hand to touch my face, he remained still, smiling, watching me coldly, as if he were the original, and I was just a fragile, worthless shadow. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a deep urge to laugh. It wasn't my own laugh, but it came out of my throat in a strange, hysterical sound, so loud that even the hallway echoed. Suddenly, the laughter turned into a scream of pain, my arms turning on me with superhuman strength, as if something else were using my body as a tool. Rock, your body is no longer yours, give up. This time, the voice was clearer, firm, like an order that was beyond discussion. I knelt on the ground, my hands trembling, biting my lip until the blood flowed, breathing heavily as if I were drowning in a sea of heavy air. Yet, there was still a part of me that resisted, a weak thread of will screaming inside me, don't give up. I raised my head with difficulty, blood gushing from my mouth, and shouted with all my remaining strength. No! I'm not yours yet. My scream echoed through the corridor like thunder, but my reflection in the mirror didn't scream. He continued to smile, growing colder and more mysterious, and then suddenly, he slowly raised his hand. At the same moment, my hand rose, unwillingly, as if I were a mere shadow moving at his command. Only then did I understand the terrifying truth. I wasn't fighting something external. I was fighting myself. Or rather, the entity that had hidden within me all along. Control was slipping away from me like sand through the fingers. And with every second that passed, I felt myself fading further, that I was merely a temporary resident of my body, while he prepared to take over completely. At that moment, the corridor was no longer just dark walls, it was an open grave waiting to close in on me. And the wider my reflection's smile grew, the more certain I was that my end had already begun. I thought I'd reached the peak of terror, that my body and mind could no longer bear it. But what happened that night proved to me that fear has no end. It's a creature that breeds within me the more I try to extinguish it, like a monster that grows stronger the more I try to ignore it. The long corridor was just the beginning, but I didn't know that its end would lead not to an exit, but to the darkest depths of hell itself. I dragged my feet as if they were no longer mine, each step like a slide into a bottomless abyss. The walls, which had been silent, began to whisper my name. Rock. Rock. Low voices, saturated with sarcasm, as if they knew my weakness better than I did. I heard them inside and outside simultaneously, as if they weren't just an echo, but a hidden call feeding off my fear. I tried to scream, to fill the space with my voice to drown out the whispers, but my voice choked in my throat. I felt as if someone was strangling me from within, an invisible fist squeezing my throat. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe, and I nearly fell to the ground had I not been pushed forward by something incomprehensible, as if the corridor itself were swallowing me. I reached the old mirror hanging at the end of the corridor. Its glass was cracked, and rust was eating away at the edges of its metal frame. I didn't want to look, every instinct within me was screaming for me to move past it, but an invisible force, more powerful than my will, pushed me to do so. I slowly raised my head, and there I was, frozen. My face wasn't my own. Half of it was distorted, its eyes sunk in black, and its mouth smiled a crooked, inhuman smile. Worse, my reflection wasn't repeating my movements. When I shuddered, it remained motionless. When I opened my mouth, it remained closed. Then suddenly, it slowly raised its hand. And I raised my hand likewise, involuntarily. My reflection approached the glass and extended its fingers, but they didn't stop at its surface. They penetrated it like water. Its black fingers almost touched my face. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding, but the ground itself seemed to be pulling me toward the mirror. That wasn't all. I felt my legs moving on their own, my steps no longer my own. I was merely a passenger inside my body, while another was the driver. My memories began to fall like dry leaves, my mother's image, my father's voice, my childhood features, all melting into the darkness creeping inside me. From upstairs, laughter rang out. Laughter that sounded like mine, but it wasn't mine. I lifted my head and saw an open door at the top. I climbed the stairs with heavy steps, and though I struggled, my feet wouldn't stop. At the dark door, I stood, panting heavily, and there I saw myself. Another version of me, sitting on the ground, bearing my features, but with eyes as extinguished as dying embers. I smiled and said in my own voice, "Isn't it time, Rock, for you to let me take the lead? You're weak, and I'm the strength." I felt the sweat dripping from my forehead, and my heart no longer beating as it had. Instead, it was beating at a strange, inhuman rhythm. I tried to say something, but my tongue felt heavy, as if the words had turned to ash. Then, from behind me, a cold hand reached out to touch my shoulder. I turned quickly, and saw nothing but absolute darkness. But it wasn't ordinary darkness, it was alive. It breathed, it stretched, and it drew closer to me like a faceless monster. I felt myself sinking into it, slowly. The more I tried to escape, the more it clung to my body. I screamed, but my scream went unheard. Even my own voice inside me sounded strange. Was I still Rock? Or had Rock died since he entered this corridor, and what stood here now was nothing but an empty shell waiting to be filled with something else? The smile on my reflection's face didn't fade, it just grew wider, and his voice filled the room. "You no longer resist. You're mine." And at that moment, I knew I was no longer the victim. I had become the mirror itself. I was no longer fully aware whether I was walking on my feet, or whether the ground itself was pulsating beneath my body, pushing me, or perhaps pulling me with it into unknown depths. Everything was suffocatingly dark. There were no colors, no boundaries, except for the echo of my ragged breathing and the rapid beating of my heart, which sounded like war drums beating inside my chest in preparation for something much bigger than me. But what truly frightened me wasn't the darkness itself, but the whispers that crept in from every direction. I couldn't determine their source. Were they emerging from the invisible walls around me? Or seeping from the pores of my skin? Or were they not external voices at all, but an internal echo emanating from deep within my head? Many whispers, intertwined, incomprehensible, yet despite their ambiguity, they carried one clear, indisputable meaning: surrender. Then I began to see faces, familiar faces engulfed in darkness, their features swallowed, yet they continued to stare at me with a piercing intensity. I saw faces I'd once loved, faces of those I'd lost, and faces of those who betrayed me and left me alone. Their eyes were all blazing, some filled with pity, as if they mourned my weakness, some filled with accusation, as if they were burdening me with a heavy burden I no longer remembered, and some with a wry smile, reminding me of a truth I'd always refused to acknowledge, that I'd always been fragile, weak, and breakable. I felt my limbs grow heavier, my fingers no longer moving of my own volition, as if I were merely a puppet ruled by tightly taut strings. The strings weren't visible, but they were there, all in the hands of a force greater than myself, a force I felt tampering with and controlling every part of me. Suddenly, a single voice rose above all the whispers. It was deep, husky, as if the earth itself was speaking. It filtered through me, not through my ear, but directly through my chest, and said with a definitive tone, "You've resisted enough, Rock. Now, it's time to end. Try no more." My whole body trembled, and a sticky chill coursed through my veins. I wanted to scream, to declare my refusal, to say no with a voice that would shake this emptiness, but all that came out of my mouth was a weak sigh, akin to the last breath of a dying man. Yet, amidst this collapse, amidst all the darkness that was engulfing me, I felt something small resisting. A tiny flame, like the flicker of a candle in a raging storm, but it was there. A tiny part of my soul refused to be buried alive, refused to be extinguished. Yet I knew full well that any additional moment of weakness would be enough to extinguish that flame, leaving me drowning in nothingness, never to return. Then the darkness itself began to materialize. It was no longer just a void, but transformed into strange, intertwined forms, resembling faceless beings. Tall, slender bodies moved with slow, measured steps, their arms reaching toward me, their fingers like black daggers. With every step they took, I felt my consciousness slipping away, drop by drop. I saw the images of my memories disintegrate, childhood moments, the laughter of those I loved, the details of my true face, all melting like drops poured into an endless sea. That's when I realized the greatest horror. I no longer had control over my thoughts. I no longer remembered why I was fighting in the first place, or who I was exactly. All that remained of me was a single name echoing faintly within me, Rock. But behind that name, there remained only a cold void. And yet, amidst this void, one question emerged and kept hammering at my head like a hammer. Should I surrender? Or did I still have one last moment to break these chains? But the answer wasn't in sight. It was so far away that I wasn't sure if my mind would survive until it reached me, or if what remained of me would be extinguished before it could even know it. I no longer knew if I was still Rock, or if I had become merely a vessel for a nightmare consuming me from within. In recent days, my mind had become like a cracked mirror. Whenever I tried to see my true face, I caught sight of another reflection smiling back at me with a distorted smile, a smile that relished my weakness and confusion. My voice was no longer mine, and my heartbeats no longer belonged to me. It was as if something invisible was seeping through my veins, feeding on my strength and nourishing itself from every strand of weakness left by my body or mind. I sat alone in the room, staring at my trembling hands, my fingers no longer fully human, as if they extended farther into the darkness than they should. Every movement brought me a strange feeling of submission and excitement at the same time. When I held the mirror in front of me, I saw my face, but I no longer recognized it. My eyes were deeper and blacker than ever, like a well opening onto a bottomless darkness. Every blink of an eye revealed another face, a version of me, but it laughed when I cried and whispered when I was silent, as if mocking my weakness. I gradually began to lose control of my thoughts. Many voices surged through my head at once, some screaming for me to flee, others demanding that I surrender. I heard them as if they were coming from deep within the earth, from beneath the walls, from the veins of time itself. You no longer own yourself. Everything has become ours. Let yourself fall. At night, as silence enveloped the house, I felt my body move involuntarily. My legs guided me toward the door, and my hands slowly opened it, as if an invisible force was leading me without resistance. I stepped out into the darkness, the cold stinging my skin, but I couldn't stop. I was like a puppet pulled by invisible strings, each step leading me into unknown worlds within myself. Yet, I strangely enjoyed losing control. Something inside me seemed to relish slow surrender. When I reached the edge of the forest, the creature that had been stalking me for endless nights appeared before me. Its form was larger and more terrifying than I had imagined, its face a hybrid of animal and human, and its eyes glowed a deep red. It moved slowly, each step making a sound like bones clanking under a strange wind. Then it raised its hand and pointed to my chest, as if something inside me responded immediately. I felt myself kneel without commanding myself to kneel, without any resistance. It whispered to me in a voice like thundering lightning. You have resisted so much, Rook, but the resistance is over. You will become a part of me, and all that remains of your humanity will be a memory. At that moment, I felt as if I were drowning in a bottomless sea. I could no longer feel my hands or feet, and even my thoughts were melting like a candle in a raging fire. Every part of me was shedding the old Rook, replaced by emptiness, cold silence, and slow acceptance. I was surrendering inch by inch, breath by breath, and every passing minute brought me closer to disappearing completely. But amidst this collapse, I felt a tiny spark. A distant, faint voice, like remnants of my old self, whispered to me. Don't let them take you. You're still here. You're still Rock. Those words echoed deep within me, but they seemed weak in the face of the mysterious flood engulfing me. I had two choices: surrender completely and melt into this nightmare, or cling to that weak spark, no matter how impossible it seemed. For the first time, I wished the night would never end, so I could think, so I could gather any remnants of myself. But the night continued, the shadows drew closer, and the darkness grew thicker. I stood between the chasm of loss and the final moment of decision, trapped between my old self and the it that wanted to swallow everything that remained of me. I no longer knew if I was truly Rock or just a faint reflection of a shadow that had once been human. My body felt heavier than a mountain, as if invisible chains were holding me from within, preventing me from even breathing. I felt myself moving, but not of my own volition, as if something invisible was leading me like a puppet by an invisible hand. A strange force seeped into my veins, like a black, toxic smoke, slowly creeping in and taking over every atom of my being, feeding on my weakness, transforming me into something I didn't recognize. Whenever I tried to scream, my voice echoed inside me like an echo in a deep void, unheard. I tried to remind myself of my name, my memories, my mother's face that I'd seen in my dreams smiling at me, but the images gradually blurred before my eyes, turning into distorted masks that laughed mockingly, as if the entire past was evaporating and turning into a featureless nightmare. During that terrifying night, the house itself groaned as if it shared my suffering. The walls slowly breathed, like a living creature, and the floor made successive crackling sounds like stealthy footsteps approaching. The air filled with a sharp hiss that pierced my ears until I imagined the entire place was transforming into a giant creature slowly swallowing me up. I sat in front of the mirror, trembling violently. I looked at my face and saw it changing before my eyes moment by moment. I no longer saw my own eyes, but rather two strange eyes, sunken into blackness, widening like two bottomless abysses. I tried to touch my face with my hand, but my hand trembled and refused to obey. Then a crooked smile formed on my lips, an unwanted smile that wasn't mine, but belonged to something else that resided within me and controlled me from within. I began to hear whispers. At first, they were soft, as if coming from far away, but then they became explicit commands. Overlapping voices, some resembling mine but with a broken note, and some I'd never known before, strange, distorted, and heavy, like an echo coming from underground. They chanted, "Leave. Don't resist. We have become you. And you have become us." I felt a harsh chill spreading from my fingertips to my chest, then creeping up my head. It was a different chill. It wasn't just a physical sensation, but a freezing of will itself, as if my mind was turning off one light bulb after another, and the darkness inside me was expanding without pause. I tried to resist, to say no, to scream, but my mouth betrayed me and uttered a hollow yes, a sound I didn't recognize, as if it were no longer my own voice. Suddenly, I began to laugh. A loud, intermittent laugh, but it wasn't my own. It forced its way out of my throat, as if it were coming from some deep abyss within me. I could hear it and shudder at it, yet I couldn't stop it. It was a strange, brutal laugh, announcing that whatever was inside me had become stronger than me. I realized then that I was losing control, not only of my movements, but even of my thoughts. Memories were being ripped from me one by one. The faces of my loved ones faded, my childhood evaporated, and my entire life turned into a blurry fog. I no longer knew if what I was experiencing was real or merely an illusion planted in my mind by that entity. Even my name, Rock, began to disintegrate inside me like ink dissolving in black water, leaving only a distant echo I could barely hear. Suddenly, I stood up, but not willingly. My body moved steadily toward the long, dark corridor. At the end was an old door, a door I had always avoided touching, a door I always felt concealed something hidden behind it that should not be revealed. But this time, I couldn't stop. I reached for the handle with my trembling hand. As soon as I touched it, a sharp chill pierced my skin, as if I had grasped the edge of a razor. Still, I slowly turned the handle, the strange smile still etched on my face. The door creaked open, and the darkness behind it was heavier than any darkness I had ever known. As I stepped inside, I heard my own voice, or what remained of it, screaming inside at the top of my lungs. "Go back. Don't open." But the other voice, the voice that had come to fill my being and dominate every part of me, answered coldly. "Too late. You're ours." And in that moment, I felt I wasn't stepping into an ordinary room, but into the dark depths of my soul, where everything that remained of me was melting away. There, in that bottomless abyss, Rock was no longer the same. He was merely an empty mask for something else, something merciless, something waiting to emerge into the world. The changes within me began to grow. They were no longer mere fragments or fleeting moments that I could ignore, but rather a mysterious entity that permeated every part of me. My body wasn't my own, and my soul wasn't mine. Instead, I felt like an empty vessel into which thick black smoke seeped, slowly filling me, stealing my last breaths and replacing them with breaths that weren't mine. At first, the whispers were soft, barely audible amidst the tumult of my thoughts, intermittent sounds like brief daydreams. But as the days passed, those whispers transformed into sharp commands, piercing my head like knives, dictating what to do, what to say, and even how to view myself. I no longer distinguished between my silence and their words, as if every word inside me wasn't mine. I noticed my hands moving on their own. Sometimes, I would wake up in the middle of the night to find the walls around me covered in dark red lines, strange, intertwined symbols, etched in still wet blood. When I looked at my fingers, I found cracks and dried blood on their tips. I never remembered how I wrote them, but I knew they had come from my hands and that something else had directed me to do them. The mirror became my greatest enemy. It no longer reflected my face, but distorted faces that stared back at me. Faces with no distinct features, except for sunken black eyes that widened every time I looked at them, until I felt as if they would suck me in. One night, I saw the mirror move, its surface shaking like deep black waters, and my hand appeared from within it, the same hand, but its nails were longer, its veins prominent, waving at me with a devilish smile I had never seen in my life. As for laughter, it was the worst. It no longer came only in my dreams, it echoed in the room even while I was awake. A deep, broken laughter echoed throughout the room, filling my chest to the point I almost choked on it. Every time I heard it, I felt a sharp chill spread through my veins, as if the blood itself was being replaced by another, heavier, darker liquid. I hadn't slept in days. Every time I closed my eyes, I found myself walking through endless, dark corridors, their walls breathing and moving like living flesh. There were rotting corpses hanging from the ceiling, and scrawny hands emerging from the floor, grabbing my feet and dragging me down. When I woke up, I found deep scratches on my legs and arms, and sometimes dried blood stains on my bed, blood I couldn't tell where it came from. Forgetfulness was eating me up. I no longer clearly remembered the faces of my loved ones, nor even my own voice. I couldn't tell if the words I was writing were actually mine or if something else was using my hands as a tool. Sometimes I read what I've written and it feels foreign to me, as if I'm reading someone else's biography. On the last night, I sat exhausted, searching for myself between ragged breaths. Suddenly, the voice inside me came, louder than ever, as clear as if it were speaking directly into my ear. You've resisted so long, Rock. It's time to surrender. Your body is no longer your body, your soul is no longer your soul. You are now ours. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. My eyes filled with black, my hands froze, and a crooked smile reappeared on my face, a smile I'd never wanted. Only then did I realize that I was no longer facing a strange force from outside. Rather, I was melting inside, slowly disappearing. And so, at that moment, I wasn't sure if I was still Rock, or if Rock had become just a memory inside a body inhabited by something else entirely. I had crossed the line between humanity and the abyss. My body was no longer mine, it was merely a puppet suspended by invisible strings, moved by merciless dark forces. My consciousness was left to sway in the darkness, a witness to the devastation, unable to regain control, while the demons that inhabited my depths began to transform me into an instrument of destruction. At first, it was like nightmares, voices simmering inside my head, orders lashed out like whips, images of blood and faces exploding in my mind. But soon, the nightmares became reality. My hand, no longer in my control, rose one night above my sleeping body, drawing symbols in the air I didn't understand. Suddenly, the neighbor's house caught fire. I heard their screams, children gasping, women crying. And me? I was just a witness trapped inside my head, able only to watch the chaos unfold. With each victim, I lost a bit of my humanity. The black magic that flowed through my veins became embers, burning away every ounce of compassion within me. I no longer needed to touch anyone to kill them. Anyone who dared look into my eyes would fall convulsively, as if their souls were being forcibly ripped from their hearts. I could hear their bones cracking from within, their entrails ripped apart without a knife, their blood spurting from their mouths like a hellish fountain. One night, I walked out into the empty streets, the city in a deep sleep. I spotted a drunken man swaying alone. I didn't even have the right to think, demons had seized my moment. I raised my hand, touched the air with a tiny gesture, and his body twisted like a burnt doll. I heard the crackle of his bones, like distorted music. He fell at my feet, his eyes wide open, his tongue hanging from his mouth like a wet rag. It wasn't just individuals. I began to see groups, to see crowds. Driven by a mysterious darkness within me, I sowed havoc among them. In the big market, where people sold their vegetables and fish, I walked through the crowd. I touched the ground with my foot, and the soil beneath shook. People fell one by one, their blood mingling with the merchandise, their screams reaching the sky. I knew I had become a walking curse. But what was even more terrifying than the killing itself was that I began to enjoy it. Yes, the consciousness trapped within me, which I had thought was a prisoner, began to revel in what was happening. Every scream was music, every body thrown to the ground a triumph. Yet, deep down, there remained a dark corner of my mind screaming at me, "Stop, I'm done." But the demons laughed, mocking my last attempt at resistance. As I sank deeper into this maelstrom, I discovered that black magic was devouring even souls after their death. I wasn't content with taking life, I was absorbing the remains of the victims' souls, returning them to the darkness to increase my strength. Their faces haunted my dreams, ghosts dissolving in my blood, screaming from within, but I grew stronger as their numbers increased. The city began to take notice. Men disappeared, women became widows overnight, orphan children wandered the streets. Someone began to whisper, "A curse dwells among us, a curse that walks in human form." I was no longer the one who decided when the horror began, nor when it ended. Whenever I looked into someone's eyes, their fate was sealed. Whenever I met people, they dropped like flies. The demons no longer needed to hide, they used my body as a showcase for their hell. I could hear their laughter echoing in my ears, as they whispered, "Now, Rock, you're not just a killer anymore, you're death itself." But, could I stop? No, that was no longer an option. I had become a machine for black magic, and whenever I tried to scream, no one heard me. All that remained of me was my consciousness, watching what remained of my humanity shatter like shattered glass in a sea of blood. The night this time was unlike any other. It seemed as if the earth itself was trembling under the weight of a force it had not known for centuries. I was floating within a bare consciousness, with no body to restrain me, no bone or blood. I was a black flame erupting from the depths of nothingness, carrying within me the wrath of generations of curses. I let out a silent scream in a space where only the one descending into destruction could hear, and the air split, a whirl of black ash rising around me. I was no longer a being surrendered to the darkness of the demons that took turns tearing me apart. I was their master, their executioner, their conqueror. First appeared the great sorcerers, those who had filled the earth with corruption and the blood of the innocent. They were gathered in one of the distant castles, surrounded by circles of fire and mysterious symbols. They thought I had come weak, a mere stranded consciousness seeking shelter. But they were wrong. I raised my invisible hand, and behold, enormous shadows emerged from the ground, sinuous arms wrapping around their bodies. Their screams rose as they tried to escape my grasp. One tried to utter a spell of protection, but his mouth was sealed shut with a trail of blood. Another fired a spear of light, but I devoured it with a single glance, extinguishing it like a candle in a hurricane. Blood began to spurt. Whenever a mage tried to resist, black talismans were embedded in his flesh, rupturing his veins and exploding his heart. One of them fell to his knees, begging, but I allowed him nothing but his skull to explode against the hall wall. Their screams were fuel for me. The demons that had thought of me as their slave materialized from within me, trying to regain control. But I had overstepped their bounds. I seized one of them, a demon of black fire, and crushed his skull to ash. The others retreated in panic, not daring to disobey me. The massacre continued for hours. Every time a sorcerer fell, I felt my power multiply. The shattered souls entered me like new fuel. I heard pleading voices, children's voices, women's voices, the voices of those sorcerers' victims, all screaming inside my head, "Avenge them." I answered. I unleashed a wave of black magic that engulfed the entire castle. The walls turned to dust, the ground swallowed up the living, and the sky was stained with steaming blood. No one escaped. But I didn't stop there. I went out to the neighboring towns, carrying not a body but a storm of hatred. I saw everyone who carried the seed of corrupt magic in their soul, and I tore them apart without mercy. Men, women, elders, everyone who had been entangled in the ancient darkness received their punishment in my fire. The night turned into a battlefield. People saw their homes burning from the inside for no reason, heard the screams of neighbors, and then found their charred bodies. They ran in panic, but there was no escape from the unseeing, merciless eye. Deep in all this hell, there was one thing that filled me: euphoria. I was finally the one dictating to the demons, not the other way around. I was the absolute master, the wizard of blood and destruction. Yet I knew, in a dark corner of my consciousness, that this power was not given without a price. The price was coming, and it would be more severe than anything I had done so far. I can't take it anymore. Yes, I can't stand this torment that has stuck with me since I became aware of these creatures tearing me apart from within. Years of struggle, of slow erosion, of whispers burning my mind and gnawing at my soul. I used to think I was the victim, but now I realize I wasn't created to be prey, but to be hell itself. I hear their screams inside my skull, the elder demons, the clan leaders, the beings who always made me fall and tremble. And now, they're all angry with me. Because I'm no longer an obedient servant. Because I raised my face, looked into their cursed eyes, and said, enough. I felt my body explode from within. Not ordinary power, but a volcano of rage and dark magic, an energy they never imagined I could unleash. I saw the ground beneath my feet crack, and the walls crumble around me. Every breath I exhaled was like a whirlwind of flame and embers. And suddenly, I saw them. The elder demons before me. Massive bodies, dark wings, eyes burning like embers. I heard their mocking laughter, their threats echoing in my ears. You've gotten out of control, Rook. It's time to tear you apart once and for all. I raised my head. I didn't feel fear. I felt something else. A frenzied desire to kill. I was like a time bomb, and every second I got closer to the moment of complete detonation. They leaped at me, dozens of them, bloodthirsty clan leaders. But I didn't move a step. I merely extended my hand. Just a moment, and their bodies disintegrated before me. Their screams filled the space. I saw their limbs fly, and I saw their black blood rain down on my face. But the rest didn't retreat. Hordes of demons swarmed around me. The ground shook under their footsteps. And yet, I was laughing. Yes, laughing madly. The more they tried to frighten me, the more ferocious I became. I screamed from deep within, and a sound came out of my throat that wasn't my own, but a roar like thunder tearing the sky apart. With the scream, everything around me turned into a vortex of black magic. I saw their faces melt, their wings burn, their feet engulfed in flames. I had entered a war like never before. A raging war between me and the Dark Lords themselves. It was no longer a struggle for survival, but a blind vengeance. I was cutting them to pieces with magic that emanated from my hands like sharp blades of darkness. Every movement I made ended a life. Every glance I made seared a soul. Blood flowed, the screams grew louder, and despite their countless numbers, I was growing stronger. I wasn't just fighting, I was enjoying it. Yes, enjoying crushing them one by one. The sky itself turned black above us. The ground was drenched in blood and corpses. In the midst of the battle, I knew I had already transformed into what they had feared all along, an invincible beast, wrath incarnate, a curse walking the earth. And now, there was no turning back. I emerged from the midst of the fierce battle between me and the demon leaders, my body barely able to withstand the endless bleeding of the dark forces I unleashed. But I was the victor, the only survivor. Now, I had only one target, my father. The one who, from birth, had condemned me to eternal damnation, opened my body to swarms of demons, and made me a vessel for cursed souls that ate me from within. My father, the source of all this hell. There was no longer any meaning to my existence except to free myself from his legacy. The rage within me was no longer human, but a black volcano erupting with every breath I took. With every step I took in the darkness, the remains of distorted souls fell around me, trying to obstruct my path, but I was no longer that lost boy. Now I was a monster, my word equal to death. When a demon approached me, I only had to stare into its eyes for a second, and it would disintegrate from existence, completely and irrevocably obliterated. They could no longer touch me. They could no longer even whisper in my head. I had become their new master, even for a moment. But the path to my father was not easy. I had to enlist the help of one ally, the daughter of Satan. She emerged from the smoke, a materialized shadow, dressed in a garment of black fire, her eyes like two burning embers in the depths of the night. She smiled, the smile of a demon who knew the extent of the devastation I would unleash. She said in a soft voice dripping with sarcasm, "At last you have learned the truth, Rock. Your father is stronger than you, and only I can bring him down. I alone hold the key to his blood, and I alone can open the way to his heart." I looked at her, and I didn't find myself refusing. I knew she wasn't helping me out of love for me, but to appease the whims of hell itself. But she was my final card. Together we set out through the cursed passages that led to his castle, my father's palace. With each step closer, the conflict within me intensified. The voices of the demons that still inhabited me screamed, trying to stop me, trying to return me to slavery. But I had made my vow, I would not stop until I sank my fangs into his heart. Finally, we arrived at the palace gate. The gate wasn't made of iron. It was made from the screams of burning souls, writhing and writhing in pain to form human penises, screaming whenever the wind touched them. The daughter of Satan opened the way with her hand, and the gate melted like a body being slaughtered alive. I advanced, and the palace opened its doors before me like the mouth of a hungry beast. I knew the moment was approaching, the moment to meet the Father who had made me a walking hell on earth. But inside me, there was no fear, only ecstasy. The ecstasy of blood, the ecstasy of revenge. I was certain that the confrontation with him would not be a human one, but a cosmic battle, a battle between me and the origin of the curse. And so, I stepped forward, hearing the last whispers of the demons trembling. "Rock, you have become what was not meant to be born, you have become the curse itself." Under the deep darkness of the night, the silent palace looked like a fortress of hellish ruins, guarded by hundreds of fiery eyes of enormous demons, arrayed like statues of eternal damnation. Deep in this deadly silence, I and the monster spirit I had become, breathing rage, dragging the daughter of Satan hesitantly behind me. There was no turning back. Tonight was unlike any other night, the night when everything that held me captive would crumble. As we approached the black gates, the clanking of iron rose as if dying, and then the demonic guards rushed at us, their forked horns and protruding fangs. I didn't wait for them to attack. I rushed forward like a hurricane, seizing the first skull in front of me, crushing it with my bare hands until its fragments scattered along the walls with the blood. The daughter of Satan froze for a moment, her eyes widening in horror and amazement as she watched me decimate the army of demons as if I were a killing machine born for this purpose. Other demons screamed and pounced on us, but I was faster than their shadows. My head slammed into one until his bones shattered, and his sword plunged into another, while my other hand ripped open a third's throat. Blood spurted, the walls turned pale, and the air was heavy with the smell of sulfur and burning flesh. My laughter erupted from deep within me, a laugh I'd never known before, a mixture of pain and pleasure, hell and triumph. Every time a demon fell, I felt my soul burn more intensely, and the beast within me was unleashed without restraint. The daughter of Satan watched me with trembling eyes. It was no longer the cold stare I'd known, but a mixture of amazement and genuine fear. I could see her hands tremble whenever I plunged my fist into a demon's chest and ripped out its heart. I realized I was no longer just a human, or even just a half-demon creature, but something else, something merciless and unfeeling of restraint. We advanced through the dark halls of the palace, leaving behind piles of mangled corpses. Not a single guard alive dared to stand in my way. I walked steadily, blood dripping from my hands like black rain. Finally, we reached the throne room where my father lay, the tyrant who had made my entire life a living hell, the source of my torment and every curse that haunted me. He lay asleep on a bed of dark stone, surrounded by glowing circles and talismans. Strange symbols pulsated with red light, an infernal energy capable of annihilating any being who came near, even Satan himself. I paused, staring at the talismans that pulsed like demonic hearts. Satan's daughter whispered in a trembling voice, "Don't come near. Those talismans have no mercy." I smiled a mad smile, then wiped the blood from my face with my hand. Even if it's fatal, it won't stop me from waking my father. My eyes glowed with a hellish flash, and every part of me screamed that the end was near. I felt a power erupting inside me, a power I'd never known before, as if all the demons I'd torn apart had melted into my veins. I took a step closer, a second, a third, and with each step, the talismans roared as if challenging me. The heat seared my skin, but I didn't stop. I could hear my father's heavy breathing, deep in his sleep, secure in his hellish fortresses. But he didn't know that his son had become a monster beyond the impossible. The daughter of Satan recoiled, fear overwhelming her, as I reached out toward the first line of talismans. At that moment, the entire hall shook, and the bloody light erupted from the symbols, beginning the moment of confrontation with the most powerful curse ever found to guard my father. I could no longer bear to see my father lying there, deep in a deep sleep, guarded by cursed talismans said to be able to crush any creature, even the greatest demon himself. I stood before the talismans, my heart pounding, but something inside me was seething, a black fire rising from deep within me, whispering to me that I was created to tear through chains, not to be crushed beneath them. Raising my hand, I summoned the fires of the netherworld, a black, writhing flame, screaming like a living creature. I threw it at the talismans, and the walls began to shake, the floor to crack beneath my feet. The talismans screamed, crumbling, belching dark red smoke. I didn't flinch. Each strike of my fire was an explosion that shook the place until the protection that had enveloped my father was shattered. Before I could get close, I looked to the side. The daughter of Satan stood there, her eyes shining with a strange cunning. She smiled a cold smile that made my blood run cold. Suddenly, she lunged, and before I could comprehend what was happening, she pulled out a hellish sword dripping with poison and, without hesitation, plunged it into my sleeping father's neck. For a moment, I felt time stand still. Blood gushed into the air like a hellish torrent, and my father's head slowly rolled before me, like a scene from a never-ending nightmare. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a strange shudder inside me, a mixture of freedom and brutality. I smiled. Yes, I smiled as I saw my father's blood covering the ground. I was liberated. There was no longer a shackle binding me to him, no longer a shadow suffocating me. I approached his body, lifted it in my hands as if it weighed nothing, then dragged it toward the gates of hell I had opened with my fire. I threw his body inside, watching it burn, char, and melt amid screams that no one but me could hear. I wasn't satisfied. I seized his soul, that black, writhing mass, and locked it in a metal container engraved with the faces of tortured demons. As soon as his soul entered there, eternal screams rose. I knew then that my father would remain in endless torment for all eternity. I turned to the daughter of Satan. She was watching me in amazement, her eyes filled with terror and fascination. She whispered in a trembling voice, "You have been transformed into a monster, into something even we cannot understand." I laughed a dark laugh and approached her, blood covering my hands and face. "I have not been transformed. I have only been set free." From that moment, I resolved to build a new family, a family devoid of decay and chains, a family of purity and freedom, a family that would not tremble before any demon or human. I knew the path would be paved with blood, and my name would be whispered in the darkness like a lurking terror. But it didn't matter, because now I was born again. I woke up in a world filled with thick black smoke, the blood I had spilled still staining my hands and face, but something inside me had changed. I had become a true monster, merciless and knowing nothing but the sound of swords and screams of slaughter. Beside me was the daughter of Satan, staring at me with her blazing red eyes, a mixture of amazement and fear etched into her features. I could see her trembling, but deep down, I knew she wanted one thing, my head. I raised my hand and unleashed the flames of the netherworld I had summoned from the depths of darkness, a wave of black fire that pierced the talismans that had enclosed and protected my father's body. The talismans could erase any being, even Satan himself, but I detonated them. I wanted to sever those cursed chains and free myself completely. I shouted in a thunderous voice, "It's over. No more talismans, no more chains. I am the chains, and I am the fire." The daughter of Satan walked slowly toward me, a malicious smile forming on her lips. "Finally, Rock, you removed the last barrier between me and what I want. Your father's head was just the beginning, but yours is what I've aspired to since birth." I looked at her with eyes sunk in shadows and smiled deadly coldly. "I know," I said, "I know you're waiting for my moment of weakness, the moment I return to the demon world, then you will mercilessly cut off my head." She was silent for a few seconds, her smile trembling slightly as if she were shocked by my words. "How?" she whispered, "how did you know?" I moved closer, until the distance between us was a thread of blazing fire. "Because," I replied, "I feel for you, as you feel for me. I've long since ceased to be human, no longer just a son seeking his freedom. I'm now the monster who trusts no one, even you." I extended my hand, a blade dripping with blood. "Let's make a deal," I said. "A deal?" She raised an eyebrow. "Yes. You don't kill me now. You wait until I return to the demon realm. Then, you'll have the right to chop off my head. I won't stop you." She laughed softly, as if embracing the idea and simultaneously fearing it. "You're crazy, Rook, but your madness tempts me." "A deal, then." She reached out her blackened hand and touched mine, and our gazes met in terrifying silence. The deal was sealed in hellfire, irrevocable. Inside, I was smiling. I left her what she thought was a victory, but I knew the road ahead was filled with betrayal, blood, and playing on the edge of death. Long years have passed since I chose the path of repentance, as if entire eons separated me from those days when I dipped my hands in blood and fire. Back then, I was a monster who reveled in slaughter and revenge. Today, I am a different man, one who carries within his heart a purity I never thought would emerge from the depths of darkness. I married and built a simple home far from the hustle and bustle of cities and the curse of magic and demons. I would wake up every morning to the laughter of my children, feeling as though I were breathing in a new life I had never known before. I would hold them in my arms, teaching them how to sow, how to harvest, and how to appreciate light in its simplest details. The years passed, both heavy and light at the same time. Heavy when the ominous memories that haunted me in my sleep returned, and light when I saw the fruit of my choice growing before me in the eyes of my children and wife. The road wasn't easy. It was filled with nightmares looming from the depths of my past, reminding me that the beast was still there, sleeping beneath my skin, ready to pounce if I ever weakened. But I persevered, and every day I won a small battle against myself. When I turned 60, I sat in my garden, watching my grandchildren play and run, while the sun slowly set behind the horizon, as if carrying with it my last secrets. My heart was heavy with time, but filled with peace. Then I realized that this was the true end, not in a bloody battle or a struggle with demons, but in the tranquility born of repentance, and in the family I had created with my own hands. I raised my gaze to the sky, closed my eyes, and said to myself and to those who would come after me, I was a beast walking among mankind, and I only found my rest when I decided to be human. Evil opens its doors wide, but it brings only destruction. Purity's path is difficult, but it alone leads to a life worth living. Then I smiled, letting my last breaths melt into the sunset, knowing that my journey had ended, but the lesson will remain immortal in every heart that knows that no matter how intense the darkness, light is too simple to be defeated. Thus ended my story. I began with steps along the paths of darkness, where cursed magic reigned, bloodlust spread, and souls were shed under the spells of hell. I was a prisoner of a dark fate crafted by my father and a curse I inherited against my will. But through a long struggle, I tore off the shackles, burned the talismans, and confronted the demons that were tampering with my destiny. My father departed to his eternal torment, and the wounds of my past gradually faded. I chose the path of repentance and built a pure family, far removed from all corruption and darkness. At 60, I was no longer that boy torn between curse and fear. Instead, I became a man who realized that the harshest wars are not against demons, but against the darkness we carry within us. The lesson my life has left behind is simple: anyone who reaches out to hell will only return burned. Light, however, always awaits those who dare to choose it. And so we've reached the end of this long journey, a journey that wasn't easy at all, not in writing it, not in narrating it, not even in editing it. Believe me, each chapter required hours of imagination, writing, and proofreading, then more hours of recording, and editing until it appears in this form in your hands. To some, the story may seem like a mere horror novel and fantasy, but for me, it was truly a complete experience, a personal challenge and an adventure with every word, every scene, and every sound. What made this effort worth every minute was you who followed, were patient, and lived through the events until the end. If you've reached this moment, you're part of this small family we're trying to build here, step by step. Your presence, support, and encouragement are what motivate me to continue, to write stronger stories and tell deeper tales. So, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and share it with your friends. With the simple click of a button, you're helping me make up for all those long nights spent in front of the computer screen, writing, editing, and producing, just to bring you something you enjoy. This isn't the end, it's just the beginning. The beginning of something more beautiful to come, with stronger stories, and tales that will bring you unforgettable moments. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for your time, your support, and for being part of this journey. We'll see you again. Until then, take care and stay prepared, because darkness always holds a new story.